Jojen Reed was not supposed to see the next dawn, or so the visions had told him. But sometimes even a greenseer's sight can waver beneath the will of the old gods. The wound he sustained in the cave when the whites closed in had been severe, and Bran Stark had felt the life slipping from his friend's body. Mira's screams had torn through the darkness, echoing off cavern walls that shook with the fury of the undead. Yet Jojen had not died. He passed through a threshold of pain so deep and consuming that all reason suggested he would breathe no more, and then, with a final rasp, he clung to the thread of life like a drowning man grasping at river reeds. Blood caked his tunic, and each time he coughed, he spat out another clot of the darkness that threatened to claim him. But Mira, half-crazed with desperation, had refused to let him go. She held him as Bran's tears fell, as Hodder trembled, as the child of the forest lit the last of her burning bombs to hold off the approaching horde. And somehow, in that desperate swirl of smoke and embers and swirling snow, Jojen Reed survived. When the surge of whites collapsed inward, hacking through bone and ragged flesh, they found no purchase in Jojen's chest. The children of the forest formed a circle of green flame and whirling shadows, each flicker fueled by an arcane power older than any living memory. The great weirwood roots themselves seemed to tighten around the cavern, constricting against the intruders. Stone cracked, dead flesh burned, and howls of the undead drowned out all else. Bran felt the energy throbbing through the air, ancient, whispering, painful as lightning in his veins. He tried to hold onto Jojen's hand, to keep him tethered to something mortal and alive. Each second felt like a small eternity. By the time the last white fell, charred bone collapsing into ash, the cave had transformed from a secret refuge into a scarred battlefield. When all was done, the three-eyed raven, ancient and weary, beckoned them deeper into the darkness. In the flickering glow of the last green-burning torches, Bran glimpsed Jojen's face. It was as pale as the moon, his eyes half shut, his breath shallow but steady. He was alive, and that small word reverberated through Bran's mind like a horn's triumphant blast. Mira did not leave his side. She cradled her brother's head in her lap, eyes red from tears she refused to show. Her arms tensed with every labored breath Jojen took, as though determined to shield him from whatever might come next. Their journey deeper into the earth was slower than the three-eyed raven would have liked. Bran felt the old man's impatience in the air. There was a purpose to be fulfilled here. Winter marched steadily upon the living, and every day counted. But there would be no leaving Jojen behind. His abilities, his knowledge were too important, and beyond that, his survival was a miracle that none of them dared squander. If the old gods had preserved his life, they must have done so for a reason. That was Bran's thought, anyway, and from the manner in which the raven regarded Jojen, it seemed he agreed. They descended until the frigid wind and swirling snow could no longer be felt. The heart of the cavern was a labyrinth of twisting roots and earthen chambers hung with crystals that caught the faint torchlight. Strange shapes danced on the walls, shadows of monstrous forms, illusions conjured by ancient magics. The children of the forest guided them, silent steps carrying them ever deeper, while the three-eyed raven glided along with supernatural grace. Hodder followed, stooped and trembling, repeating Hodder over and over in a fearful hush that made Bran's heart ache. Mira stayed at Jojen's side, half carrying him, while Bran willed himself not to panic at each sign of Jojen's weakening. At last, they reached a hidden hollow, where a still pool glimmered in the torchlight. The water, though dark, seemed reflective of more than just the flickers of flame. The raven turned, robes swirling about his ancient frame, and nodded toward the pool. "Lay him in the water," the raven commanded with a gentle authority. Mira hesitated, but Jojen coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Bran's stomach knot, and she complied, letting the child of the forest assist in lowering him. When Jojen's body touched the water, an electric tingle crawled up Bran's spine. The water took on a soft glow, like moonlight across glass. An unseen current stirred. Bran swore he could hear a distant heartbeat in the earth itself. Jojen's eyes shot open, his lips parted, and he gave the faintest gasp. the gash in his side, gaping and slick with dried blood, eased from a ghastly wound to a smaller tear in flesh, as though days of healing took place in a single breath. Jojen groaned, and Mira, her hair hanging in damp tangles, let out a choked sob of relief. That moment seemed to last for an age, and Bran felt the presence of the old gods around them, swirling in a hush of invisible leaves. Once Jojen was strong enough to stand with help, the three-eyed raven waved them onward again. "We have much to learn, much to see, and little time," he said. His voice echoed with an air of finality. Together, they entered a great chamber beneath the roots of an immense weirwood that was half buried in the stone overhead. Bran could feel the tree's consciousness enveloping them, almost like a silent host greeting beloved guests. They had come for wisdom, for the secrets of the Greenseers, and perhaps for a power that could turn the tide against the ancient darkness that had returned. For days, weeks, perhaps, the passage of time became meaningless underground. They studied under the raven's watchful gaze. He taught Bran how to sift through the currents of history, how to open his third eye and walk amid dreams. He encouraged Jojen, too, though the boy's gifts were of a different nature. Jojen's visions came unbidden, glimpses of the future, swirling in cryptic images that he struggled to decipher. The three-eyed raven helped him focus those visions, to hone them like a whetstone sharpens a blade. Even as Jojen's body remained fragile, his mind grew clearer by the day, stronger than it had ever been. Sometimes, Bran would hear him whispering about shapes in the snow, of a great storm gathering in the north, of crows turning into ravens and ravens turning into shadows. Mira would listen in solemn silence, her eyes dark with the weight of her brother's portents. Meanwhile, outside the cavern, the Night King was gathering his army. Far to the south in Winterfell, Jon Snow and the rest of the north prepared for the inevitable war, not knowing that hope might yet bloom beneath the roots of the weirwood. Months earlier, the future had seemed bleak. Jojen Reed was fated to die, Bran was meant to become the three-eyed raven, and the Night King's victory appeared all but certain, delayed only by the valiant stand at Winterfell in the original timeline. But the future had twisted upon itself in this hidden sanctum. Jojen Reed lived, and every day he lived might bring them closer to understanding how to defeat the enemy that threatened all life. In one of Bran's earliest visions, one that he recounted hesitantly to Jojen and the three-eyed raven, he saw the Night King standing at the seat of House Stark. The walls had fallen, the courtyard was choked with ice, and the dead walked in silent ranks. The direwolf banners had been burned into black cinders, floating across a sky that pulsed with unnatural storms. In that vision, there was no hope. It was a glimpse of the darkest thread of destiny. Yet Jojen insisted that fate was not fixed, at least not entirely. "The waters of time may flow in a single direction," he would say, breath still raspy as he recovered. "But there are many currents. Some are stronger than others, but none are inescapable." Bran clung to that belief. In his lessons, he learned to walk through the memories of ravens and weirwoods scattered across the vastness of the north. Sometimes, he soared on black wings over frozen rivers, or drifted through the leftover snows in the Gift. Other times, he passed into the trunk of a great weirwood, its face carved with tears of sap, and witnessed events from centuries past. The signing of pacts, the forging of Valyrian steel swords, the last stand of heroes from the Age of Heroes. Along the way, he felt Jojen's presence, lighter than a breath on his shoulder, guiding him to the crucial fragments that might reveal how the first men once banded together with the children of the forest to hold back the White Walkers. He saw spells woven in blood and tears, symbols carved into weirwood hearts, and mysterious watchers who guarded the realms of men in the shadows. The raven taught him how to glean knowledge from these echoes without losing himself. Jojen helped him interpret the whispers, each new image of ice or fire. Mira stood guard. Even while she slept, her spear lay within arm's reach. Hodder lingered near, fretful but loyal, his voice a low hum through the quiet halls. The children of the forest passed silently among them, guardians of secrets they had once shared with the first men in the dawn of days. In the quiet gloom, Jojen's voice often rose in feverish prophecy. At times, he was seized by trembling fits, eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. Mira would hold him, and Bran would watch, powerless, as Jojen gasped out lines about a night that never ends, or a brand of cold iron pressed upon the living's hearts, or a dragon lost in the swirling snow. Some nights, his visions frightened him so deeply that he woke screaming. Yet from these terrors, he gleaned a surprising truth. The Night King's power was bound in ways few understood. There were ancient wards, remnants of the pact between the first men and the children, that prevented the White Walkers from crossing certain thresholds. The wall was the greatest of these, but not the only one. Runes carved on the walls of the crypts beneath Winterfell also carried a protective influence. The presence of living Starks in their ancestral seat stoked that protective magic. If that bloodline was broken there, if those wards were corrupted, then the North truly would have no more safe harbor. It was Jojen who saw how to reinforce these wards, though it was not without cost. "Blood calls to blood," he said shakily, resting against a weirwood root that curled like a serpent. "A Stark in Winterfell is the key, but the wards must be awakened, fed. Life must be willingly offered, not just any life, Stark blood, like a lock that needs the right key. If we do it, it might slow the Night King, perhaps stop him." Mira demanded clarification. "What are you saying? Are you telling Bran he must sacrifice himself?" Her voice pitched with disbelief and fear. The flickering torchlight cast jagged shadows across the carved walls, as if the old faces etched into the wood were listening. Jojen's voice was hollow, though unwavering. "There are many shapes of sacrifice. Perhaps not death, perhaps something else. But the wards must be sealed again, awakened, with the blood of a Stark who claims Winterfell as his own." Bran listened, heart pounding. He did not want to die. He had lost enough, his mobility, his home, his carefree youth. He was ready to sacrifice for the realm if that was the only path, but he could not quell a surge of terror. "I'll do what I must," he whispered, though his voice trembled. "But I'd rather find a way to stop the Night King without more death." Jojen's gaze, flickering with a vision's glow, fell upon Bran. "There may be another way," he murmured, "but the old gods only show me fragments." The three-eyed raven watched them in silence, as though this discussion was a test. Bran found no direct guidance from him. He supposed that was the nature of the power they wielded. It was not to lead them by the hand, but to open doors and let them decide which path to take. Finally, the raven spoke. "You have seen the wards, Jojen Reed. You have glimpsed the forging of them thousands of years ago. What else did you see?" Jojen shut his eyes as if focusing on a memory behind the lids. "A circle of weirwoods, far in the haunted forest beyond the wall," he said softly. "A great ring of living trees carved with the faces of the children's gods. There was a meeting place, something about a dawn that never broke. The power in those trees was old, older than the wall, older than the Undulls. If the wards of Winterfell could be joined with that circle's magic, it might form a chain that binds the Night King. Even if he marched upon Winterfell, he might not conquer it." Bran breathed in hope as though it were the first fresh air after a long winter. "Then we need to find that place," he said. "We can't just hide here forever." A flicker in the three-eyed raven's eyes suggested that he already knew of this circle. Perhaps he had known for centuries. "Then you must go," he said. "You have learned what I can teach you here, Bran Stark. You have gleaned from the trees, soared in the skins of ravens. Jojen Reed has found his path again. If the living are to have a chance, you must walk it. But know that once you leave this cavern, your destinies rush to meet you. There will be no respite." He was not exaggerating. The day they emerged from the cavern, the wind felt sharper, the cold more brutal, even though summer had not fully died in the south. The Night King's presence was stirring the very seasons, hastening winter's fury. Snow whipped across their faces, stinging like needles. It took time to adjust after so long underground. Mira stood at the threshold, spear at the ready, scanning for signs of whites or White Walkers. The child of the forest who had helped them at the pool parted ways, vanishing back into the gloom like a specter. Jojen leaned heavily on his sister's shoulder. though his color had improved since his near-fatal wound. Hodder hovered protectively near Bran, who sat astride a crude weirwood sled shaped and grown by the children for him. With it, he could be pulled through the snow more easily. They were a ragged band, but they carried knowledge and determination that burned like a hidden flame in the darkness. North they traveled, deeper into the forest of frosted pines and black-barked sentinel trees. Beneath an overcast sky, they followed the pull of Jojen's vision. Each morning, or what passed for morning beneath the gloom, he would close his eyes and let his mind drift into the green dream. When he opened them, he spoke of faint lights shimmering in the distance, or the shape of an ancient oak leaning to the east. Mira, ever the protective sister, scouted ahead for dangers. Hodder pulled Bran's sled, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold. The journey was grueling. They survived on dried meat the children had given them, supplemented by what game Mira could hunt. At night, they found shelter beneath the thickest evergreens or beneath shallow caves in the hills. More often than not, Bran felt the presence of the dead, echoes of them at least lurking in the darkness. Twice, they encountered lone wights that shambled across their path, eyes glowing with unearthly blue. They destroyed them with dragonglass arrows Mira carried. But each such meeting was a grim reminder that the Night King's servants roamed freely now, an ever-expanding net of death. A week into their journey, Jojen stirred awake from a vision as they made camp near a frozen stream. His face dripped with sweat despite the cold, and his pupils were dilated. Mira clutched his arm. "What did you see, Jojen?" she asked softly. His voice trembled. "The Night King moves beyond the wall. Eastwatch stands, but not for long. He's gathering storms to him. Snows so thick they blot out the sun, allowing his army to move without pause." He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. "But there is still time for us to do what we must. If we fail, I saw Winterfell taken, the wards in the crypts failing, the bones of Starks used in vile rituals to strengthen his hold. A sea of the dead stretching across the north. We cannot fail." Bran suppressed a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. He pictured the halls of Winterfell, where he had once run and played, where his family had once gathered at feasts, where the memories of his mother and father lived. He imagined that proud seat desolate, crushed under ice, the direwolf banners destroyed. "We won't fail," he said quietly, meeting Jojen's gaze. Mira nodded firmly, though fear lingered in her eyes. The next day, Jojen led them to an ice-choked canyon. At its end, half hidden by a landslide of frozen rubble, they found a passage that twisted beneath a ridge. The wind keened like a grieving mother through the stones. There, etched into a slab of black rock, Bran spotted the faint outline of a face, a weirwood face with a solemn expression. His eyes were closed. Jojen insisted they were on the right path, that past the black rock and through the tunnel, they would find a ring of weirwoods standing sentinel in the gloom. They crept inside the passage. The darkness was nearly absolute, relieved only by a single torch that Mira lit. Hodder went first, scanning for obstacles, with Bran's sled scraping softly behind him. Jojen followed, leaning on his sister. The cramped tunnel forced them to walk single file, the walls cold and damp with condensation that dripped into puddles beneath their feet. Echoes of their footsteps made it sound as though more people were following them. Once, Bran thought he heard a whisper that was not their own, a low murmur that seemed to be chanting. But when he concentrated, the voice vanished. After hours of slow progress, they emerged into a hollow open to the sky. It was ringed by towering weirwoods, their bark white as bleached bone. Faces adorned each trunk, carved so long ago that the edges were softened by centuries. Snow dusted the clearing, and a hush lay over it like a burial shroud. The wind outside still howled, but here it was still. Bran's breath caught in his throat. He felt the same presence he had sensed in the Raven's Cave, an ancient awareness that pulsed in the quiet. It reminded him of the gods would at Winterfell, only deeper, stronger, older. The entire ring of trees seemed alive with silent watchers. Jojen Reed's voice was almost reverent. "We're here." He spoke so softly that the sound barely rose above a whisper. He stumbled forward, and Mira caught him. Together, they approached the center of the ring. Bran signaled for Hodder to pull him closer. Something tugged at Bran's heart as he gazed at the nearest weirwood face. Sadness or awe, or some mixture of both. The old gods were watching them more intently than ever. And then, without warning, Jojen collapsed. Mira cried out, dropping to her knees at his side. Bran felt a rush of panic. They had come so far. Could fate be so cruel as to steal Jojen's life now? But the boy was not dying. His eyes rolled back, and his mouth moved, though no sound emerged. He twitched and trembled, as if caught in a violent storm that only he could see. Bran reached out, placed his hand on Jojen's brow, and felt a wave of images surge through him. He was momentarily lost in the swirl of the green dream. He saw Jojen standing in the ring of weirwoods, blood dripping from his hand into the snow. He saw swirling runes forming in the air, woven from shadow and moonlight. He saw the crypts of Winterfell, the massive stone likenesses of the Stark lords, their eyes open, glowing faintly. He saw the Night King's face, pale, crowned with icy horns, and behind him, a legion of the dead, stretching across the horizon. He heard a voice, old as the world, whisper, "Blood for the wards, blood for the dawn." Then everything went w-height. When Bran opened his eyes, Jojen was awake again, panting, lips parted in exhaustion. Mira looked between them, tears clinging to her lashes. "Tell me what to do," she implored. "Tell me how to save him, to save all of us." Bran sat upright in his sled, heart pounding. He could feel the presence of the weirwoods pressing upon him, a silent urging. "He saw something," Bran said softly. "A ritual. Here." Jojen lifted his hand. "It has to be Stark blood," he said, his voice so faint that they had to lean in to hear. Before I thought maybe my blood might help. I have the gift of green dreams. I have the blood of the Crannogmen, who have always been close to the old gods. But that's not enough. It has to be Stark blood, freely given, in a place where the old gods' power runs as deep as the earth's roots. Bran felt as though a hand were closing around his lungs. "How much blood?" he asked softly. Jojen closed his eyes. "Not death, but a deep cut, painful, a sacrifice of life's essence, so the wards can be awakened. You're the Stark in the north now, Bran. You carry the name, the lineage. If you do this, I will," Bran said immediately, fighting the tremor in his voice. Part of him was terrified. Another part felt a strange calm. "Tell me what I must do." With Mira's help, Jojen guided Bran to the center of the ring. Hodder stood nearby, wringing his great hands in concern. "Hodder," he murmured, uncertain. Mira knelt at Bran's side, spear set aside, her gaze full of worry and determination. Jojen's steps were unsteady, but he managed to draw a small dragonglass dagger from his belt. Bran recognized it as one they had used to defend themselves against whites. Jojen placed the dagger in Bran's hand. "You must cut your palm," he whispered. "Let your blood touch the roots. Speak the words that come to you. The old gods will do the rest. Mira and I'm not sure what we must do, but we'll stand guard. The Night King has spies everywhere. He may sense this magic awakening." Bran nodded. The swirling sense of destiny filled him, a dread and a certainty all at once. He let Hodder steady him, shifting so he could press his left palm against a thick weirwood root that broke through the snow. The bark was rough beneath his skin, and it pulsed with a slow, ancient heartbeat. With his right hand, he held the dragonglass dagger. His breath billowed in white plumes, summoning courage from the memory of his father, his mother, his siblings. He drew the blade across his left palm. Pain flared bright and searing. Warm blood welled up, dripping in thick droplets onto the gnarled root. First, nothing happened. Then Bran felt a sensation like a low rumble through the earth. The weirwood seemed to drink in his blood. Red rivulets seeped along the bark's grain, vanishing into hidden channels. The carved face nearest him, tall, solemn, seemed to open its eyes, revealing with stained red, as if it bled tears of sap. The other trees in the circle joined in, one by one, until all the carved eyes were seeping red. Bran inhaled sharply, heart hammering. An invisible wind rustled the branches overhead, though the ring itself remained still. The swirling snow glistened in the uncertain light, and the hush turned electric. He wasn't certain what words he was meant to speak, but something ancient rose within him, an echo from the days of the first men. His lips formed syllables he did not recognize. The language spilled from his mouth, resonant, rhythmic. He felt power coursing up his arm from the weirwood root, filling his veins with a prickling heat. The dagger in his hand vibrated. The air thickened. Around them, the carved faces seemed to watch, mouths agape in silent chant. Jojen sank to his knees, pressing his palms to the ground. Mira remained on her feet, scanning the circle warily, spear in hand. Hodder trembled behind Bran, repeating his name in a terrified hush. Snow swirled faster. The ring of weirwoods hummed with energy. Then Bran felt himself slipping into their network of roots, into a dream that spanned centuries. He saw the construction of the wall, the forging of the wards in Winterfell, the circle of weirwoods blazing with arcane life in the earliest days of the North. He witnessed glimpses of giants, of children weaving spells with green fire. He saw the faces of all the Starks who had bled for the land, who had given their lives to protect the North. He felt them joining him in this moment, a tapestry of souls woven into the ancient heart of the old gods. Their presence strengthened him, guided him. Through that link, he reached out beyond the ring of trees, across the frozen forests, toward Winterfell. He felt the wards that slumbered deep in its crypts, wards carved into stone, etched into the tombs, crafted in blood by the earliest Stark kings. The wards recognized him. They recognized his blood, his sacrifice, and they awakened like sleepers stirred from a long slumber. In his mind's eye, Bran saw faint lines of power weaving through the foundation of Winterfell, out through the walls, up the towers, and down again to the crypts. Winterfell glowed like a fortress of living magic. The wards pulsed once, then again, like a second heartbeat. He heard a distant shriek, echoing across his mind. Whether it was the wind or the Night King's outrage, he could not say. The power of the circle flooded him, linking him not only to Winterfell but also to the ancient ring of weirwoods beyond the wall. In that vast tapestry of awareness, he sensed the White Walkers, their frosty presence blotting out the warmth of life. He sensed their necromantic hold upon thousands of whites. He sensed the Night King's own mind, cold and sharp as an obsidian blade, searching for the source of this sudden disruption. It was terrifying, but Bran did not shy away. He clung to the weirwood root, letting his blood flow, letting the old gods shape his will into a barrier against the darkness. Minutes or hours later, Bran could not be sure. He came back to himself, slumping in the sled. The cut on his palm throbbed. The ring of weirwoods still bled sap from their carved eyes, each thick drop falling onto the snow. Jojen was on the ground, unconscious or close to it, exhaustion etched into his pale features. Mira was breathing heavily, one hand braced on her spear. Hodder looked dazed. The hush still held, but it felt triumphant now, as though the air was charged with success. Though the cold bit into them, Bran felt warmth within. He let out a ragged breath. "It's done," he whispered, voice raw. Jojen opened his eyes, blinking wearily. "I saw it," he managed. "The wards woke. The crypts, they burn with old magic. Winterfell is protected anew, stronger than before." Mira exhaled a laugh mixed with relief. She clutched Jojen's shoulder, helping him sit up. "And the Night King?" "He felt it," Jojen said. "But he can't break it easily. Not without a great betrayal or another power to counter it. We've given the North a chance." Bran closed his eyes, feeling a profound fatigue settle over him. Yet his spirit soared. With the wards strengthened, Winterfell stood as a beacon against the undead. The Night King might lay siege to it, but he would not easily breach the magic that guarded those walls. And if Jon Snow or other allies of House Stark held Winterfell, that living Stark presence would continue to feed the wards. They had bought time and a fortress that might stand against the end of days. But their work was not finished. In the nights to come, Jojen continued to dream. He glimpsed the Night King's armies shifting course, drawn west, perhaps aiming to circumvent the wards or find another path. He saw battles in the swirling snow, black silhouettes clashing with pale figures. He saw living men take heart at the rumors that the old gods themselves rise to defend the north. Ravens flew from the weirwoods, carrying invisible blessings. The living were not alone. Wordless, the small group broke camp at the ring of trees. Though the place felt hallowed, they could not stay. Soon, the dead would sense what had happened, or worse, the Night King might come in person to tear apart the circle. They had to stay ahead of the enemy to carry word south to Winterfell to ensure that Jon Snow, if he indeed ruled there or soon would, understood what had been done. And above all, they had to make certain the wards were not undermined by ignorance. The living needed to know that Winterfell was now a linchpin for the entire realm. Their journey south was no less perilous than before. The storms seemed even more relentless, as though the Night King's rage churned the skies. Bran often found himself slipping into the skins of nearby ravens to scout ahead, or to look for potential threats. In these dreamlike forays, he observed the migration of the dead, the thickening gloom. But he also saw pockets of resistance. Small bands of wildlings rallying behind Tormund Giantsbane, men in black cloaks who might have been remnants of the Night's Watch, and a handful of northern lords who had realized the futility of fighting each other when the real enemy marched from the cold. The land was a patchwork of chaos and fleeting alliances. The tale of the living's resilience was unfolding on every front. As they neared the edge of the gift, they found a half-burned farmhouse where they took shelter for a night. Mira managed to capture a hare, and they roasted it. The meager meal felt like a feast to their hungry bellies. Bran's wound on his palm had begun to close, though the scab was thick and dark, and the scar would be permanent. He could still feel the subtle echo of magic whenever he closed his hand. The ward's power lingered in his blood. Jojen, though physically frail, seemed more focused than ever, his green dreams offering clarity. One evening, he gazed into the firelight and said, "We must be careful when we reach Winterfell. If the wards sense a threat, they may lash out." I saw shapes in the crypts moving, old bones stirring, but not to serve the Night King. Rather, to protect Stark blood. Some part of the old heroes still lingers. Brandon the Builder, King Theon Stark, the Hungry Wolf, even the she-wolves who once ruled. They watch over their descendants, awakened by the ritual. To them, friend and foe alike might appear suspect if they don't recognize the blood. If we bring others, we must do it under the banner of Stark authority. Bran swallowed hard, remembering the stories old Nan used to tell of the lords of Winterfell rising from their graves to defend the keep in its darkest hour. He had always thought them children's tales, yet he had witnessed enough wonders to believe that nothing was impossible anymore. If the old Starks guarded the crypts, then the realm of men had more allies than they knew. They pressed on, encountering scattered refugees fleeing south. Fear weighed heavy on these travelers' faces. Some recognized Bran Stark's name, though they had assumed him dead. Others warned of whites prowling the countryside, picking off the vulnerable. Once, at dusk, Mira spotted a figure on the horizon, standing atop a hill. A lone White Walker, spear of ice glimmering in the dying light. They waited in tense silence as the figure surveyed the land. Eventually it vanished, melting into the darkness. Jojen suspected it was scouting, measuring how the wards might affect the dead's path. That night, they slept in shifts, huddled against a bare rock outcrop. Hodder whimpered in his sleep, haunted by nightmares of the whites that had once dragged him down in that cave. Bran tried to soothe him, but the best he could do was project calm thoughts through their bond. It was enough to steady Hodder for a time. When at last the walls of Winterfell came into sight, Bran felt a surge of relief and apprehension. The ancient fortress rose against a leaden sky, its towers outlined in the faint gleam of setting sun. Snow draped the battlements, but the gates stood tall, guarded by men wearing the direwolf sigil on their cloaks. Bran recognized some of them from older memories. House Glover men, maybe a Mormont or two, all mustered to help defend the seat of House Stark. Word had reached them that the living needed to unite. And leading them, stationed at the gate, was a face Bran had yearned to see again. Jon Snow. Though cloaked in dark fur and carrying the weight of command, Jon's gaze lit up when he saw Bran's sled approaching. At first, disbelief flickered across Jon's features. Then came joy, tempered by concern. He rushed forward, ignoring the watchful stares of the men around him. "Bran," he breathed, voice quivering. "Is it truly you?" Bran's eyes glistened. "Hello, Jon," he managed, his throat tight with emotion. Memories collided in his mind. Jon ruffling his hair, Jon saying farewell before leaving for the wall, Jon hugging him when they were boys. Now they were strangers in many ways, yet still bound by blood. Jon's gaze flicked to Mira and Jojen, then to Hodder. Recognition, shock. "You survived," Jon murmured, taking in Jojen's pale figure. "All of you." Jojen merely nodded. "We have news," he said, "and a chance to stop the Night King once and for all, but only if we hold Winterfell." Jon's face darkened with solemn gravity. "Come inside. You'll have food, fire, anything you need. Then tell me everything." Bran felt the wards stirring as they crossed the gate. For a heartbeat, the stones of Winterfell hummed with unseen energy, welcoming him, acknowledging his blood. Jojen sucked in a breath, no doubt sensing the same phenomenon. Guards escorted them through the courtyard, where Northmen trained in the snow and supplies were stacked to prepare for a long siege. People paused in their tasks to stare at Bran, at Jojen, at the tall, timid giant of a man known only to them by rumor. Some recognized Bran, even though they had assumed him lost forever. Others watched with respectful curiosity. An undercurrent of hope rippled through the fortress. They were ushered into the great hall, where fires crackled in the hearths. The warmth was a blessed relief from the bitter chill outside. Jon led them to a table near the head of the hall. Nearby, Sansa Stark stood, regally composed, flanked by advisors. Her eyes widened at the sight of Bran. Words caught in her throat. She rushed forward, ignoring protocol, and embraced her younger brother. For a moment, they were siblings again, set free from the burdens of the war. Then, behind her, Davos Seaworth coughed gently, bringing them back to the present. Jon introduced Davos, Tormund Giantsbane, and other commanders who had gathered to defend the north. Also present was Samwell Tarly, who looked as though he'd nearly fainted at the sight of Bran alive and well. "You've come at last, Bran," Sam said, voice breathless. I have so much to tell you. About the old records, about what we might do." He hesitated, glancing at Jojen. "You as well, Jojen Reed. We all thought. The visions said you wouldn't. Well, it's a miracle." Jojen offered a wan, grateful smile. A miracle or the old gods intervening. The difference might be small. They settled around the table, exhaustion etched on every face. Jon commanded that food and hot drinks be brought immediately. As soon as Mira and Jojen had eaten enough to steady their hands, the story spilled forth. Bran described their time with the three-eyed raven, the vow to stop the Night King, the journey to the Ring of Weirwoods. Jojen explained how the wards of Winterfell had been reawakened with Stark blood. Even as he spoke, they all felt the living hum in the castle's stones, a subtle resonance that made the hair on their arms stand on end. "So that's why it feels different in here," Tormund muttered, scratching his red beard. "Warmer, somehow, like a hearth after a long hunt in the wild." Sansa's brows drew together. "But if the wards are awakened, does that mean the Night King cannot breach our walls at all?" "Not easily," Bran answered. "He would have to find a way to undo the magic. That might mean destroying me, or sacrificing a Stark's blood against our will, or perhaps some other dark ritual. We can't let that happen. If the wards fall, there may be no second chance." Jon turned to Jojen, studying him with the intensity he once reserved for judging men who joined the Night's Watch. You said you had a way to stop the Night King once and for all. A chance. The wards will protect Winterfell, but that doesn't destroy the dead. Jojen's eyes flickered. Bran, with the Raven's power, can slip into the memories of the land. He might find a key to unmake the Night King. There's an origin to his power, a source tied to the earliest rituals done by the children of the forest. If we sever that source, the Night King might be undone. But doing so requires confronting him on his own ground, possibly north of the wall or on some ancient battlefield. He was created near a weirwood, so he can be unmade the same way. A hush fell over the table. Sansa looked between them, lips pressed tight. And you would do this alone? That's madness. Jon shook his head. Not alone. We'll gather allies. The free folk will help, if Tormund speaks for us. The Knights of the Vale are here too, and though they might fear the cold, they can march if they must. He exhaled, as though preparing to carry the weight of the realm on his shoulders. We'll send ravens to every corner. If the wards hold, Winterfell will be a rallying point. If the dead can't break through easily, we stand a chance to gather enough men to fight them back. But to truly end it, someone will have to lead an expedition behind enemy lines, or lure the Night King close enough to a weirwood so that Bran can do what needs to be done. Bran felt a tug of dread at that. Images of the Night King, his icy gaze, his silent command of the dead, sent a chill through him. But he remembered Jojen's words about destiny not being fixed. We'll do it, Bran said, quietly but firmly. I won't let the realm fall. Slowly, a plan began to form. It was the stuff of mad legends. That a young crippled Stark and his Crannogman companion, guided by ancient knowledge, could unmake the greatest threat the living had ever known. Yet in Winterfell's hall, with the wards humming in their bones, it felt possible. The gathered men and women spoke of logistics, supply lines, potential alliances. Davos offered counsel with a clear, practical mind. Tormund boasted that his free folk would follow if they thought there was a chance to end this winter for good. Sansa vowed to keep Winterfell strong, to ensure the wards stayed fed by Stark presence. Jon pledged to march as well, though the question of who would remain behind to lead weighed heavily. In the midst of that flurry of planning, Bran and Jojen exchanged a glance. The faintest smile crossed Jojen's face. They had done what the Green Dreams demanded. They had put the living on a new path. The future was still uncertain, but hope glimmered where once there had been none. Jojen's survival had been pivotal. If he had died, Bran would never have learned how to reawaken the wards in time. The Night King would have found Winterfell unprotected. The final advance of the undead might have been unstoppable. Exhaustion overcame them soon after. Servants showed them to warm chambers. Bran parted from the others with a grateful nod. Mira supported Jojen up the stairs to the tower room they were offered. Hodder carried Bran to his old room, or what had been refitted into suitable quarters. The moment they shut the door, Bran felt a flood of memory. Here, in this tower, he had once gazed at the training yard, dreaming of being a knight. So much had changed since then. Too much to full. Why grasp in a single moment? As he lay on a bed for the first time in months, the weight of his journey sank into his bones. Hodder eased him down gently. Outside the shutters, the wind howled, but within, there was a sense of security. A fortress guarded by the old magic. Hodder murmured, standing awkwardly by the door, uncertain. Bran smiled. It's all right, you can rest. He stared at the ceiling, following the lines of the heavy timbers. For the first time in what felt like ages, he did not fear the next day. He drifted into sleep, and dreams took him. He saw glimpses of the future. A great battle outside Winterfell, the dead surging against the walls but unable to breach them. The living fighting with renewed vigor, hearts aflame. Wolves howling in the forests, the trees themselves seeming to shift and twist in defiance of the dark. And beyond the horizon, the Night King stirring with rage, compelled to face this new threat. Morning came with a fresh snowfall. Jon, Sansa, and the others had set the fortress into a flurry of activity. Ravens flew out, their black wings beating against the cold sky, carrying messages of hope and urgency. Soldiers drilled in the courtyard. Blacksmiths hammered out weapons with dragonglass edges, newly arrived from Dragonstone. Ghost, Jon's albino direwolf, prowled the battlements, as silent as the hush of a moonless night. Bran met with Jojen in the Godswood, where the heart tree stood white and solemn. In the early light, the face carved into the heart tree wept red sap. Jojen's color had returned a bit, though he leaned on a staff to stand. Mira was never far, her concern plain to see. They spoke softly of the next step. "We must lure the Night King to a place of our choosing," Jojen said. "North of the wall or near another weirwood. If we're not careful, we risk losing everything." "We'll find a way," Bran said. "Jon has more allies than we ever dreamed possible, and I have connections now to the Ravens, to the Weirwoods. We can coordinate our movements. Your dreams will guide us." Jojen nodded, though the weight of that responsibility showed in his eyes. "I'll do my best." His gaze flicked to the carved face. "I never thought I'd live to see this day, to stand in the Godswood of Winterfell with you. The dream said I would die before." Bran reached out, placing a hand on Jojen's shoulder. "You survived for a reason. We all need you. The North needs you." They fell into a comfortable silence, letting the hush of the Godswood envelop them. The leaves overhead were mostly fallen, leaving bare white branches that reached skyward like bony fingers. Snow dusted the ground, muffling sound. Bran could hear the distant clang of steel from the courtyard. The living prepared for the fight of their lives. Over the next few days, more allies arrived, braving the increasingly treacherous roads. Lady Brienne of Tarth appeared at the gates with a small retinue, sworn to protect Sansa. Lyanna Mormont led what remained of her Bear Island warriors. Gendry, a skilled blacksmith with Baratheon blood, worked the forges day and night, forging new weapons from dragonglass and steel. The Vale Knights stood side by side with wildlings, grudgingly bridging their distrust. And at the heart of it all, Bran and Jojen quietly laid out the strategy for the final confrontation. At night, Jojen's visions grew more vivid, more urgent. He saw swirling patterns of ice creeping across the map of the North, unstoppable unless they took a bold risk. To truly destroy the Night King, they would need to confront him where his power was strongest, which seemed counterintuitive. Yet the wards gave them a sanctuary from which they could plan. The living had the advantage of time, however brief, to choose the battlefield. Eventually, word reached them that the Night King's army had paused somewhere between the Last Hearth and the Dreadfort. Whispers suggested that the undead were uncertain how to proceed. Winterfell's wards were newly awakened, and the Night King felt them as a barrier he had not anticipated. Scouts reported pockets of the dead circling the countryside, testing for weaknesses. Some brave watchers even claimed the Night King himself had been seen atop an undead dragon, circling the skies but not daring to approach too close to Winterfell. The final confrontation loomed, an unspoken promise in the gray horizon. Amid the tension, an unexpected arrival brought news that changed their plans. A raven arrived bearing Daenerys Targaryen's sigil. She and her forces were marching north, her dragons grown and ready for battle. The news sent murmurs of excitement through the castle. Dragons could offer the living an immeasurable advantage. But Jojen, on hearing it, grew pensive. "Dragons are power incarnate," he said quietly to Bran. "But the Night King has tasted that power already. He might have a means to challenge it." Still, the living needed every ally. Jon sent back messages, welcoming Daenerys to join their cause at Winterfell. Soon enough, Daenerys arrived with her retinue. 2 dragons circling overhead, monstrous silhouettes roaring defiance at the sky. The Northerners, though many were wary of a Targaryen queen, could not deny the awe of living fire incarnate. Daenerys herself strode into Winterfell's courtyard with regal poise. She greeted Jon with guarded warmth and Sansa with measured respect. But when she met Bran, who sat in his wheeled chair near the heart tree, she seemed uncertain. "You are the three-eyed raven?" she asked, recalling the stories. Bran managed a small nod. "I am Bran Stark," he said. "The three-eyed raven's gifts pass through me." Daenerys's gaze flicked to Jojen, who hovered nearby. "And who is this?" Jojen inclined his head. "Jojen Reed, your grace. My visions led Bran here." He explained briefly how they had reawakened the wards. Daenerys listened, occasionally glancing at Bran as if she doubted the depth of these powers. But there was no denying the hum in Winterfell's walls, or the sense of safety that contradicted the biting cold. "If we truly have such wards, then we must use them," Daenerys said, her voice firm. "But we cannot simply hide behind these walls. I have 2 dragons. We can strike at the dead from above. We can burn the whites, scatter them, perhaps even challenge the Night King directly." Jojen's face paled. "Be cautious, your grace. The Night King has his own monstrous power. If you face him unprepared, you risk losing everything." He recalled the vision of an undead dragon. Some had seen it at Eastwatch. Even now, the memory turned his stomach cold. But Daenerys was nothing if not determined. Fire sparked in her eyes. "I will not hide like a frightened mouse while the realm is devoured. I came here to fight." Bran understood her resolve, even admired it. But he also knew the confrontation would require more finesse. If the Night King was undone by a straightforward battle, they would have done so already. The wards, the ancient spells, these things existed because the White Walkers could not be defeated by steel and fire alone. Still, he said nothing. He sensed that fate was weaving a complicated pattern, and Daenerys Targaryen's will was part of the thread. At night, Jojen's latest dream revealed a final piece of the puzzle. He woke Bran in the quiet hours, eyes wide with urgency. "I saw the Night King at the Weirwood Circle where we did the ritual," he said. "He was searching for a way to corrupt it, to break our link to Winterfell. We have to stop him there. If he succeeds, the wards might crumble." Alarm coursed through Bran. "But that's deep in the haunted forest, north of the wall." "Yes," Jojen said grimly. "Jon has an alliance with Daenerys. Perhaps if we move quickly, we can fly there with the dragons, or slip past the dead in smaller numbers. We can't let him break that circle." Word was given, and by dawn, a plan was hastily formed. Jon, Daenerys, a select group of fighters, and Bran, along with Jojen and Meera, would head north. They would move swiftly, hoping to catch the Night King before he could unravel the magic. The wards at Winterfell would remain strong as long as they remained bound to that circle. Sansa and the other lords would stay behind to guard Winterfell in case it was a ruse. The risk was enormous, but the alternative was worse. If the Night King corrupted the circle, Winterfell's wards would fail, and the final stand would end in disaster. When the moment came to leave, many begged Bran to remain safely behind the walls. But Jojen insisted that Bran's presence at the circle was crucial. He was tied to those roots by blood. Only he could safeguard the link. Hodder was prepared to accompany them, refusing to leave Bran's side. They formed a small expeditionary force with dragons overhead, hoping that speed and stealth would serve them better than an army. Dragonglass weapons, Valyrian steel, and hearts of steel were all they carried besides the barest provisions. The flight north on Dragonback was an experience Bran could hardly fathom. Daenerys and Jon took the reins of the 2 living dragons, Rhaegal and Drogon, while a handful of the group followed on horseback, guided by Tormund across the rough terrain. Bran rode with Jon, strapped carefully behind him. The wind buffeted his face, so cold it stung his eyes. Below, the vast, snowy waste spread out like a moonscape. Jojen flew with Daenerys, though the strain of altitude and frigid air weighed on his wounded body. Meera followed on horseback with the others, racing across the bleak land. Time blurred. The Night King's storms churned the skies. The dragons roared, weaving through banks of black clouds. Occasionally, Bran took the mind of a raven to scout ahead, searching for signs of the undead. When they neared the circle of weirwoods, the land seemed unnaturally quiet. A preternatural hush blanketed everything, as though the entire forest held its breath. And then they saw him. The Night King stood in the ring of trees, an imposing figure of ice-blue skin and eyes like frozen voids. Around him, whites crowded in silent ranks. Their presence corrupted the sacred ring, with frost creeping up the weirwood's bark, threatening to snuff out the living magic. As the dragons descended, the whites lifted their dead faces. The battle commenced in an instant. Rivers of flame from Drogon's maw set the undead ablaze, shrieking in hideous unison. Rhaegal strafed the other side, clearing a path to the circle. Jon landed first, leaping from the dragon with Ghost at his side. Tormund and the others fought valiantly, cutting through whites. Daenerys soared above on Drogon, raining fire. Bran clung to Rhaegal, heart hammering, waiting for the moment to strike. He could sense the old magic of the circle, battered but holding on. He needed to join with it, to reinforce it from within before the Night King's presence could unravel what they had done. The Night King turned his icy gaze upon them. He lifted a spear of crystalline ice and hurled it skyward. A swirl of wind carried it with lethal grace. Rhaegal banked sharply, the spear missing by a hair's breadth, but shards of ice ripped across the dragon's scales. Bran felt a jolt as if the blow had grazed his own flesh. The Night King was lethal at range. Drogon answered with a torrent of flame that forced the Night King to step back. But even dragonfire did not fully consume him. A swirling shell of frost and dark magic shielded him, and though his armor of ice cracked in places, he endured. Dead hands rose from the snow, clawing at the living. Jon and Tormund led a charge, hacking their way closer to the circle. Gendry swung a dragonglass hammer that shattered whites like glass. Jorah Mormont, still battered from previous battles, fought with a Valyrian steel sword. Amid the chaos, Jojen staggered into the circle. Frost was already creeping across the weirwood faces, blackening the carved eyes. He pressed a hand to the largest root, hissing as cold bit through his skin. "Bran!" he cried, voice raw. Bran slipped from Rhaegal's flank, feeling Hodder's arms gently lift him. Under the swirling darkness, Hodder carried him into the circle. The old roots were brittle with ice. The carved faces moaned in a silent lament. The magic was unraveling, the Night King's corruption spreading like an infection. Bran could feel the wards in Winterfell falter. He had to intervene, to pour his essence into the circle once more. He closed his eyes, let Hodder lay him near the central root. Blood sacrifice had awakened the circle once before, so he reopened the scar on his palm, pressing it to the root. Pain flared, but he welcomed it, letting his blood drip onto the bark. He channeled his will, his memories, his love for his family, for the living. In a rush, the weirwoods responded, trembling as though trying to break free from the icy grip. The circle glowed faintly, red veins pushing back against the frost. The Night King sensed this. He strode forward, raising a hand. The whites converged, desperate to stop Bran. Jojen tried to stand in their way, brandishing the dragonglass dagger. He fought with surprising fierceness, but he was no great warrior. A white slashed at him, tearing into his already weakened side. Jojen cried out, collapsing. Mira, frantic, came sprinting through the melee, spear whirling. She skewered the white that had struck her brother. Blood soaked Jojen's clothes anew, the wound torn wide by the blow. "Stay with me," Mira screamed, sliding to Jojen's side. A cluster of whites lunged to finish them, but Hodder, clumsy, brave Hodder, plowed into them, flinging them aside with a bellow of rage. In that moment, Bran felt Jojen's pain through the green bond they shared. Jojen might die here, fulfilling the visions he had once seen, but not without completing their purpose. Summoning every shred of strength, Bran sank into the weirwood, letting his mind merge with its ancient power. He reached out to Jojen, drawing on his visions, forging them into a single, decisive blow against the Night King's corruption. The ring of trees blazed with a sudden burst of green light, swirling up from the roots like living fire. The whites in the circle convulsed, shriveling as the power of the old gods consumed them. The frost creeping up the bark melted in an instant. The carved faces bled fresh sap in rivulets of red. The Night King halted, throwing up an arm to shield himself from the blast. Outside the circle, Drogon swooped low, Daenerys on his back. She unleashed a torrent of dragonfire that collided with the Night King's aura. The old god's magic from the circle combined with the dragon's flame, and for a brief, searing moment, the Night King's defenses wavered. Jon lunged forward, brandishing long claw, its Valyrian steel glinting with an otherworldly sheen. He plunged the blade at the Night King. The blow struck true, cutting through the weakened ice armor into the being's chest. A scream tore from the Night King's throat. Silently, it reverberated, an otherworldly wail that shattered ice for yards around. His form cracked, splitting along lines of bright blue. For a heartbeat, Bran sensed the entire tapestry of the dead unraveling. The whites froze where they stood, movements stuttering as if their strings had been cut. Then, with a sound like 1,000 shards of glass raining down, the Night King splintered into icy fragments, dissolving into a swirl of black mist and blowing snow. The whites collapsed en masse, bodies crumpling into lifeless husks. A sudden, impossible quiet descended. Daenerys stared from atop Drogon, breath heaving. Jon stood panting, sword still held in his trembling hand, the last flakes of the Night King's essence floating away. Gendry, Tormund, Yora, all looked around, disbelieving. The dead were truly dead. The circle of weirwood stood untainted, leaves fluttering in a gentle breeze. Bran exhaled, collapsing against the root, tears freezing on his cheeks. It was over. The final advance of the Night King had been halted. The wards of Winterfell remained strong, ensuring no second wave would rise. The living had won, but victory came at a price. Mira knelt beside Jojen, who lay still on the ground, breathing shallowly, blood pooling beneath him. She pressed her hands to the wound, sobbing his name. Bran summoned what strength he had left to crawl through the trampled snow. He touched Jojen's forehead, ignoring the searing cold. Jojen's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Bran. "We did it," Jojen whispered, voice fragile as cracked ice. "The dream was wrong. I lived long enough," he coughed, spitting blood. Bran sensed his life force slipping away, the mortal coil failing. Yet in his eyes, there was peace, even pride. Mira wept openly. "Don't you dare leave me again," she choked out. "We need a maester, we." Jojen's hand found hers, squeezed weakly. "It's all right. My purpose is fulfilled." He tried to smile, though it was tinted with pain. "All those visions, they led here, to this moment. We saved the realm." Bran could barely speak past the lump in his throat. "Yes, we did." He willed his own life's energy to flow, just as the circle had shared its power. But he was spent, the well of magic nearly empty. All he could offer was comfort. Jojen's breath rattled, shallow. His gaze slid to the weirwood faces overhead, and he managed one last whisper. "I see, a warm day in the neck. Home. The water's so blue, Mira." Then he sighed, body relaxing in his sister's arms. Bran felt the last spark of Jojen's life slip away, like a faint candle extinguished. Mira gasped as if struck, pressing her face to her brother's cheek. The hush of the forest swallowed her cries. Bran's vision blurred. It was a bittersweet triumph. Jojen's survival had been crucial to guiding Bran, to reawakening the wards and leading them to this victory. But fate claimed him at last, though not before he changed everything. Around them, the living gathered, battered and bruised, yet victorious. Jon knelt, setting a hand on Bran's shoulder. Tormund placed a palm gently on Mira's back. Daenerys dismounted, her face solemn, out of respect for the fallen. The circle of weirwood stood pristine once more, guardians of the old gods, testaments to a victory that would reshape the realms of men for generations to come. In time, they carried Jojen's body south, back to Winterfell, where he was laid to rest in the Godswood, beneath the watchful eyes of the Heart Tree. Mira mourned him every day, but she carried his memory as a badge of honor. Bran, too, grieved. In the days that followed, the living celebrated the end of the long night's threat. The wards in Winterfell continued to hum with protective power. The old heroes in the crypts settled back into their eternal vigil. The realm had been spared from the Night King's final advance. And so, in the hush of a north no longer terrorized by the dead, People spoke of Jojen Reed in reverent tones. The boy who was meant to die but lived on long enough to guide Bran Stark, to save the realm from eternal winter. And though sorrow hung over those who loved him, hope prevailed. Spring would come again, and with it, a future free from the shadow of endless night. Bran became the living bridge between the old gods and the new age. Mira walked by his side, spear in hand, carrying on her brother's legacy. Jon, Daenerys, Sansa, and the others helped rebuild, forging alliances that stretched across kingdoms. In quiet moments, Bran would sit beneath the heart tree, closing his eyes. He could almost feel Jojen's presence in the rustle of leaves, in the gentle murmur of the roots. The dream that once foretold Jojen's death had been subverted. He had survived long enough to reshape destiny itself, and though he was gone, his sacrifice ensured that the Night King's final advance never came to pass. The realm endured, and in the gentle breeze that whispered through the weirwoods, one could almost hear Jojen's quiet voice saying, "We have saved them. Now let the living live." In the days following their return to Winterfell, the castle's walls echoed with both celebration and mourning. Word spread quickly of the Night King's downfall in the haunted forest, of how the old gods' magic and dragonfire had combined to shatter the ancient foe. The people of the north, weary from fear and loss, found renewed hope in each sunrise. Yet they also spoke in hushed tones of Jojen Reed, the Crannogman boy who had lived beyond his fate to guide Bran Stark, only to perish at the very moment of victory. His death cast a shadow on every triumph, reminding all that even miracles came at a cost. The body of Jojen Reed was laid out in the Godswood for the customary vigil. Mira Reed refused to leave him during that solemn span, standing guard with her spear planted beside her as hours turned to a full day. The heart tree bore silent witness, its carved face streaked with red sap that seemed like tears. A hush hung over the small gathering allowed into the grove. Bran, Jon Snow, Sansa, Samwell Tarly, and a few of Jojen's closest companions. Daenerys Targaryen had offered to attend, but Mira had asked for privacy. She had lost her brother to this war, and she wished to say her farewells in peace. Bran watched from his chair, hands folded in his lap. Snow gathered on his cloak, but he barely felt the chill. His mind turned inward, recalling how many times he had warged alongside Jojen, slipping between visions of past and future. He remembered Jojen's determined face beneath the hollow gloom of the three-eyed raven's cavern, the boy's unwavering commitment even as death loomed. There was a kinship there as profound as blood. When Bran closed his eyes, he swore he could still hear Jojen's voice in the wind, offering quiet reassurance. Mira knelt beside her brother's still form, placing a hand against his cold cheek. Her tears had dried some time ago, leaving her expression strangely calm, as though some part of her had slipped into a place beyond ordinary grief. Finally, after the vigil, her gaze flicked up to Bran. "He wanted us to live," she said softly. "All of us. He wanted the realm to know peace, to see the spring." Bran nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The old gods themselves seemed to press close, as if listening. A single leaf, still clinging to the heart tree's highest branch, fluttered loose and spiraled down into the snow. The hush in that moment felt like a collective heartbeat. Even Jon Snow, standing back with Ghost at his side, bowed his head. They carried Jojen's body to the crypt-like chamber within Winterfell's walls that had been prepared by the castle's septons and the few remaining followers of the old traditions. Though the Reeds followed the old gods, House Stark custom allowed them to entomb allies within the keep's protective wards if they had played a pivotal role in safeguarding the North. It was an unusual honor. Some of the lords murmured that only Stark family members or legendary heroes were laid to rest near Winterfell's Godswood. But Jon, as the recognized leader of the North for the moment, insisted. "He died saving us. He died saving everyone," Jon said. "That's worth more than 1,000 traditions." So Jojen was placed where the magic of the wards ran strongest. The solemn procession included Mira, who bore herself as a warrior in mourning, her face streaked with soot from the funeral torches. Hodder walked with bowed shoulders, hands twisting nervously, his soft muttering echoing off the corridor walls. "Hodder, Hodder." Over the next days, visitors came in quiet streams, some to pay respects, others simply curious about the boy who had played so great a part in averting the long night. Meanwhile, life continued beyond Winterfell's gates. In the training yard, a new legion of volunteers and conscripts drilled with dragonglass-tipped spears and swords, not fully trusting that the dead were truly gone. The old threat had loomed so large in the northern mind that letting go of fear felt unnatural. Yet each day that passed without sight of whites or white walkers instilled greater confidence. Scouts ventured out to confirm that the countless dead had indeed collapsed, strewn across plains and forests, free of the animating blue glow. In the far north, some discovered that even the undead giants had fallen, their enormous bodies frozen in final repose. Dragons circled the skies above, stirring rumors. Many in the north had never seen a dragon, not even in the old stories told by grandparents around the hearth. Now Daenerys Targaryen's 2 living dragons, Drogon and Rhaegal, were a daily sight, soaring with regal menace over the parapets, sometimes hunting for deer or goats on the nearby hills. The crackle of their breath and the shimmering heat of their flame was a constant reminder that a new power had arrived in the north. Some of the northern lords viewed the dragons with a mixture of awe and simmering unease. They spoke in low tones about Targaryen fire and Stark ice, wondering if Westeros had simply traded one threat for another. But Daenerys made no overt show of conquest in Winterfell. Indeed, she seemed subdued after the battle in the haunted forest. The war against the dead had taken so much from everyone, including her. She had lost Viserion at Eastwatch. She spent long hours with Jon in strategic discussion, or alone in the library with Samwell Tarly, poring over old texts about the creation of the White Walkers. Though the Night King had fallen, she did not intend to let any such horror rise again. At night, the great hall buzzed with new life. Feasts were held to commemorate the victory, though these were modest by southern standards. Food remained scarce after years of irregular harvests, and the winter winds were still howling. Yet the warmth of the fires and the laughter of survivors made the meager fare taste sweeter. Minstrels dusted off songs that had not been played since the Age of Heroes, singing of Bran the Builder and the children of the forest forging alliances under the weirwoods. They wove Jojen Reed's name into new ballads, calling him the prophet who lived, though Mira never stayed to listen, unable to bear the rawness of her loss. Bran joined these gatherings sometimes, though he spent many of his nights in quiet communion with the godswood. He could sense the wards pulsing through Winterfell, a heartbeat that resonated with his own. He studied the old spells, slipping into weirwood dreams, searching for any lingering pockets of corruption. Though the Night King was undone, the memory of that malevolent presence still haunted the roots of the world. Bran believed in caution. If the land carried even a spark of the White Walker's magic, it had to be understood before it could fester. Through these dream journeys, he discovered that some of the old magic was now deeper than before. Winterfell's wards had been reinforced by the final battle in the far north, as though the union of Dragonfire and Greenseer power had reshaped the tapestry of the realm. There were even fleeting glimpses of life stirring in hidden corners. Child of the forest enclaves that had once closed themselves off to men, watchful animals that seemed keener, slight changes in the weirwood leaves. Something about the victory had resonated with the essence of the land, like a knotted rope smoothed out. He shared these insights with Jon and Daenerys, with Sam as well. They were fascinated, if not entirely certain of the implications. Perhaps the North will flourish again, Sam mused one morning by the library's hearth. If the long night has truly ended, maybe we'll see a new spring, warmer days, better harvests. There might even be a chance for real unity in the Seven Kingdoms. Jon nodded, though shadows lingered in his eyes. The revelation of his Targaryen parentage, discovered before the final clash with the dead, still weighed on him. He had told Sansa and Arya, and of course Daenerys knew. Yet the rest of the realm remained ignorant for now, and Jon did not wish to press a claim on the Iron Throne. He had seen too much death to hunger for a crown. Daenerys, too, seemed uncertain about her course. The whole matter of inheritance felt trivial compared to the threat they had faced, as though the living had found a cause bigger than any single throne. Still, the question of rule had to be addressed eventually. Messengers arrived daily from the Riverlands, the Vale, even from King's Landing. Cersei Lannister had barricaded herself behind the city walls, refusing to ally with the North even in the face of the Night King, though rumor had it that she was quietly relieved to hear the dead were no longer an immediate menace. In fact, some whispered that Euron Greyjoy had abandoned her in the final days, sailing off to the Iron Islands to protect his own. The realm was fractured and exhausted, with no clear authority bridging the divides. One crisp morning, as a pale sun climbed above the battlements, Daenerys called a gathering in Winterfell's courtyard. Lords and ladies from across the North and the Vale, as well as envoys from the Riverlands, assembled in a circle around the castle's training yard. The snow had been cleared from the center, revealing hard-packed earth turned to mud in spots. Jon Snow stood by Daenerys' side. Sansa, regal and watchful, kept to Jon's left, while the likes of Lyanna Mormont, Lord Royce, Davos Seaworth, and others formed the perimeter. Bran and Meera were offered places near the front, though Meera remained somewhat withdrawn. Daenerys lifted her voice, carrying with the authority of a queen well accustomed to command. "We've won a great victory," she said, and heads nodded in agreement. "The Night King is gone, but our battles are not over. The realm lies in ruins, warlords in the west, skirmishes in the Reach, the Iron Islands unsteady, King's Landing uncertain. We have a chance to forge a lasting peace, to unite under a just ruler who will guide the Seven Kingdoms toward a better future." Some watchers murmured, anticipating that Daenerys might claim the throne. Others glanced at Jon, who stood quietly. The tension was palpable. Would the Targaryen queen declare herself the absolute monarch, or offer another path? She surprised them all by turning to Jon and taking his hand. "But I do not wish to rule alone. I've learned much since first I set sail for Westeros about loyalty, about sacrifice, and about the cost of blind ambition. If we are to build a realm worth living in, it must be built on trust, on partnerships that bridge old hatreds." Jon's eyes flicked to Sansa, to Davos, to the Ring of Lords. The old impulse to deny any claim rose in him, but Daenerys squeezed his hand gently, and he spoke instead of retreating. "I've never wanted a throne," Jon said, his voice carrying the sincerity that made soldiers follow him. "I wanted to protect my family and the people of the North. Now that the dead are gone, I still want that. But the realm needs peace, true peace, not the kind that lasts only until the next tyrant rises." The lords glanced at one another. Even Tormund Giantsbane, leaning on his sword with a faint smirk, seemed curious to see how this would unfold. Lyanna Mormont spoke up in her blunt manner. "The North has always been wary of bending the knee to southern rulers. But we also can't stand alone if the rest of the realm is in chaos. We've bled enough. I lost many of my kin to the dead. If there's a chance for real unity, we should hear it." Daenerys inclined her head respectfully. "House Mormont has my gratitude, my lady. You fought bravely against the dead. I propose that the realm recognize both my claim, as the last Targaryen, and the North's right to self-determination. If the North would accept me as its ally and queen in name, I would in turn recognize the North's near autonomy in matters of self-rule, so long as we remain united against external threats." A ripple of surprise went through the gathering. Sansa arched a brow. "You'd allow the North to govern itself? Under a Targaryen monarchy?" Jon caught Daenerys' gaze and answered quietly, "We've seen how petty divisions nearly doomed us all. We can't go back to that. But neither can we ignore the North's unique culture and loyalty to the old ways. If we stand together, House Stark, House Targaryen, and all the lords who wish to join us, we might create a realm that respects differences instead of punishing them." Davos cleared his throat, stepping forward. "The old ties are complicated, and I've no love for kings or queens who'd see good folk suffer. But if the Dragon Queen would truly keep her word, if she'd treat the North as partners, it's a better deal than any Lannisters ever offered." Some lords still harbored skepticism, but the greater part of them had been impressed by Daenerys' willingness to fight for the North's sake, her efforts in the final battle, and her partnership with Jon. Over the next hour, the courtyard became a place of heated debate. Voices rose, tempers flared, but at last a provisional agreement was reached. If Daenerys and Jon would travel south, rally the remaining great houses, and offer them a vision of a more unified Westeros, the North would back them. The Vale pledged its knights in support, hoping to ensure the safety of trade routes and an end to the roving mercenary bands that plagued the Riverlands. The River Lords, in turn, saw an advantage in having the unassailable fortress of Winterfell as an ally, especially now that it was warded by magic. After the gathering dissolved, Sansa pulled Jon aside in the cloister by the Great Hall. Snow trickled from the sky, melting on the cobblestones. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice low. "You barely wanted to be king in the north. Now you might be called king consort of Westeros, or whatever titles the lords conjure. You never wanted any of it." Jon looked at her, something like weariness and hope mingling in his expression. "I don't want power for power's sake, but maybe we can do some good this way. It's the only plan that might avert another war between the Crown and the North. Besides, I'm not certain the rest of the realm will accept me or Daenerys without a fight. Cersei still clings to the Iron Throne in King's Landing. We may have to face her, or find a diplomatic way to make her stand down." Sansa nodded, tapping her foot lightly against a loose stone. She wrapped her furs tighter around her shoulders. "I'll remain here, then, to keep Winterfell secure, and to protect the wards. They need a Stark presence, and Bran is strong, but he can't handle politics alone. Let me do that for him." Jon's lips quirked in a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Sansa. Winterfell needs you. We all do." As the negotiations for the southern expedition began in earnest, Bran and Meera spent more time in the Godswood. Meera rarely left Jojen's resting place for long, though she did so at Bran's gentle urging when the prospect of food or a warm fire was too pressing to ignore. One late afternoon, as the sun cast copper highlights through the bare weirwood branches, Bran found her sitting on the cold stones, knees drawn up to her chest. He approached quietly, letting his sled scrape over the snow. Hodder lingered behind him, ever watchful. Meera glanced up, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You needn't hover over me, Bran," she said, though her tone lacked its usual sharpness. Bran leaned forward, his hands resting on the edges of the chair. "I'm sorry," he said simply. I know it's not my place to say, but if there's anything you need, I still can't accept that Jojen is gone. Not fully. There are times I swear I sense him in the roots, in the wind." Her gaze moved past him to the heart tree. The red sap from earlier vigils had dried in thin streaks across the pale bark. "I feel him sometimes too," she admitted softly. "In the hush before dawn, or when the wind catches the leaves a certain way. We spent our whole lives by the marshes, hunting and fishing in the neck. He used to tease me that I'd turn into a frog if I spent too much time in the swamp." She let out a trembling breath. "I'm not leaving until I'm sure his sacrifice mattered. I know the Night King is gone, but if the realm falls into chaos again, if this peace unravels into bloodshed, then what was the point of it all?" Bran reached out, gently taking her hand. "His sacrifice did matter. He saved us, saved the realm, and we'll honor that by ensuring we don't slip back into petty wars. I promise you, Meera, I'll do everything in my power to guide a better future." Her fingers tightened around his. The Godswood was silent but for the wind. At length, she nodded. "Then I'll stay. As long as there's work to do, I'll do it." In the following weeks, the plan to move south took shape. Daenerys would fly with Drogon and Rhaegal, leading a contingent of Unsullied and Northmen. Jon would ride at her side on the ground, forging alliances with lords who had not yet pledged themselves. Tormund decided to return north of the Wall with most of the free folk, believing they would fare better in the emptier lands, now that the dead were gone. "The south is too crowded and hot," Tormund joked, "and there are fewer crows to mind our business beyond the Wall these days. Let the living have their kingdoms." A small knot of wildlings chose to remain in the Gift or near Winterfell, drawn by the chance to settle farmland or earn coin as hunters. There was an uneasy acceptance between them and the northern folk. Memories of old raids lingered, but after fighting together against the Night King, prejudice felt hollow. Some of the strongest friendships forged in the battle lines refused to be undone by old hatreds. On a cold gray morning, the southern-bound column set forth from Winterfell's gates. The dragons soared above the ramparts, their roars echoing across the distant forests. Jon led the cavalry, Ghost loping at his side. Daenerys flew overhead for the first leg of the journey, then landed to ride among her people. Davos Seaworth served as her primary advisor. Gendry joined to help with forging and engineering tasks that might arise, while Jorah Mormont, his loyalty unwavering, commanded the unsullied vanguard. Sansa, Bran, and Meera stood on the battlements to watch them depart. Sansa's hair rippled in the frigid wind, her expression composed but troubled. "I hope this gamble pays off," she said quietly. "If Cersei is still cunning, she won't yield easily. And there are opportunists everywhere, from the Reach to Dorne." Bran could only nod, still adjusting to the echoes of magic in his mind. Jon and Daenerys won't be alone. Word of the victory over the dead will spread. Most of the realm will want peace, one hopes. Meera kept silent, scanning the horizon. Only when the last of the host had vanished into the snowy distance did she turn away. They made their way back down to the courtyard, where normal life pressed on in subdued rhythms. Blacksmiths hammered steel, stable boys carted fresh straw, and guards patrolled the walls. Winterfell still felt like a city under watch, but the old terror no longer weighed on it. Instead, the wards thrummed beneath every footstep, as if celebrating the safety they now bestowed. That very afternoon, a raven arrived from the citadel. Samwell Tarly had written ahead to request a new maester for Winterfell, given that the previous one had perished during the Bolton occupation. The citadel's reply announced the imminent arrival of an acolyte trained in healing, lore, and alchemy, one who supposedly excelled in the esoteric. Bran felt a surge of relief at the news. With the realm changing so quickly, Winterfell would need someone well-versed in the old texts and the new. Sure enough, less than a fortnight later, the new maester arrived. He was a tall, thin man named Maester Alliser, wearing thick spectacles and a broad fur cloak over his gray robes. He carried a single large trunk stuffed with books, vials, and instruments. Immediately, he requested a tour of Winterfell's library and an audience with Bran Stark. They met near dusk in a small solar warmed by a crackling fire. Sansa joined them briefly, introducing herself as Lady of Winterfell in Jon's stead. The new maester bowed deeply. "My lady, Lord Stark, I'm honored to serve here. I've studied much about the wards of Winterfell and the recent events in the north." My colleagues at the Citadel scarcely believed half the stories until Samwell Tarly, a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, sent his accounts. Bran eyed him carefully. He was used to skepticism from learned men regarding magic, but the Citadel had changed under the pressure of the White Walker threat. Many maesters had begun revisiting old manuscripts on prophecy and the Age of Heroes. "You're welcome here, Maester Alliser," Bran said, "but you must be prepared. Winterfell is unlike anywhere else. The wards are active." "Indeed," Alliser replied with curious excitement, adjusting his spectacles. "I've already felt something, a presence, you might say. The old texts mention a living magic bound to the Stark's bloodline. I should be delighted to assist in studying and preserving that magic, if you'll permit me, Lord Stark. And I've been told you have certain gifts of your own." Bran shared a meaningful glance with Sansa before answering. "I do. I can see through the weirwoods, sometimes the ravens, and the past. The Citadel might call it green seeing. It's a power older than any record. As for studying it, we'll proceed carefully. This magic doesn't respond well to intrusion." The maester inclined his head with respect. "Of course, I shall be discreet and obedient to your guidance." Over the following weeks, Maester Alliser settled into his chambers, rummaging through ancient tomes that had lain neglected in Winterfell's library. He asked Bran countless questions about the wards and the circle of weirwoods far north. Meera and Sansa eventually contributed their own observations, describing the strangeness of Jojen's visions and the final battle. Slowly, the maester began compiling a written chronicle, an account of how Jojen Reed had helped awaken the wards, how Bran Stark had sacrificed blood to empower them, and how the union of men, dragons, and old gods' magic had ended the threat of the Night King. Yet as the world beyond Winterfell churned, new tidings trickled in. Cersei Lannister remained ensconced in the Red Keep, refusing all entreaties for a diplomatic settlement. The Iron Islands were in turmoil, with Yara Greyjoy returning from captivity to reclaim her birthright. The Stormlands had no clear lord after the Baratheon line's collapse, though some whispered Gendry might have a claim if he chose to press it. In the Reach, a power vacuum lingered after the fall of House Tyrell, with various bannermen squabbling for control. It was a realm ripe for further bloodshed, unless someone united it under a stable crown. One day, a battered rider arrived with a missive from Daenerys. The man barely clung to his horse. Sansa had him carried to a bed in the Maester's tower. Bran joined her there as Maester Alistair tended the messenger's wounds. Finally, the man croaked out his message. Jon and Daenerys had taken Riverrun after a tense standoff with a band of mercenaries loyal to Cersei. They had liberated the Tully seat and established a safe corridor for supplies. The River Lords were flocking to their banner. Yet the cost had been steep. Another skirmish, more dead. Daenerys implored Sansa to send additional troops if possible, or at least to hold any potential northern reinforcements at Moat Cailin as a strategic reserve. War threatened to break out in earnest if Cersei continued her resistance. Sansa read the parchment, jaw tight. She looked at Bran with worry. This is exactly what Jon hoped to avoid. Another war. But if Cersei won't budge, if she's hiring mercenaries, Bran's thoughts wandered to the wards, Jojen's sacrifice. So many had died to stop a war that would have ended the world, only for the living to risk falling into another conflict. "We have to trust Jon and Daenerys," he said, trying to sound steady. "They won't wage war lightly. They know what's at stake." That night, Bran slipped into the godswood once again, letting the chill air sting his cheeks. Hotter, as always, followed at a respectful distance, though after a time, he drifted off to doze near a warm brazier. Bran found Mira by the heart tree, as if she sensed his approach. She offered a slight nod but did not speak. The reflection of the moonlight on the snow cast the weirwood's face in sharp relief. Its carved eyes, dark hollows streaked with dried sap, seemed to watch them. Bran placed a hand on the trunk, feeling the steady pulse of the wards beneath Winterfell. He closed his eyes, reaching out into the silent tapestry of the land. For a moment, he soared across the north in the mind of a raven, glimpsing lonely ridges and frost-covered moors. Then he dipped south, passing over the Twins, where House Frey once reigned. They had been scattered in the aftermath of the Boltons' defeat, and some tried to hide from the new alliance forming under Jon and Daenerys. Further south, the ravens soared over the Trident, the waters half-frozen, swirling with broken ice. Soldiers camped along the banks. He glimpsed the Targaryen banners, the Stark direwolf, and the white swords of the Kingsguard that Daenerys had begun to form anew with trusted knights. Tents spread in orderly rows, fires winking against the gloom. He sensed the tension in those men, the knowledge that they might march on King's Landing. In the distance, crows circled a battlefield where recent bodies still lay. The echoes of conflict reverberated through the Weirwood network, though these southern lands had fewer heart trees left. Still, Bran felt a pang of sorrow. This was not the glorious victory he had dreamed of when they ended the Night King. This was the messy, human struggle that persisted in the living world. He withdrew from the vision, breathing unevenly, his fingers trembling against the bark. Mira watched him with concern. "What did you see?" He shook his head, words failing him at first. "They're still fighting. The smaller battles now, but it could grow. Cersei refuses to yield." Mira's mouth curved into a grim line. "After all that's happened, men still cling to power. We can't force peace on them, can we?" Bran felt tears gather at the corners of his eyes, though he wasn't entirely sure why. "I don't know," he admitted. "I only know that we must do our part. Protect the North, ensure the wards stay strong, and be ready if the realm calls for help again." Jojen believed in that future, one where the living unite. Perhaps the living still have a chance to realize it. As the weeks passed, news of minor victories and skirmishes filtered in. Jon and Daenerys consolidated power in the Riverlands, forging alliances with House Bracken, House Blackwood, and other families that once warred among themselves. They appealed to the memory of what everyone had faced during the long night, reminding all that men must not spill each other's blood in endless feuds when new threats could arise at any time. Slowly, more lords came to heel, wary of Dragonfire and hopeful for peace. Only King's Landing and the Crownlands held firm to Cersei's cause, bolstered by the Golden Company, Sells-wards lured by Lannister gold. Amid this backdrop of uncertain conflict, the North experienced something akin to renewal. The free folk who remained established small camps near the New Gift, forming a new type of settlement where once only Black Brothers of the Night's Watch had walked. The Watch itself had been reduced to a bare handful of men, for the Wall's purpose seemed moot without the White Walkers. Some Watchers talked of repurposing the castles along the Wall for trade or lodging travelers. Others claimed the Night's Watch would continue, if only as a symbolic force to ensure no horrors ever rose again. With so few recruits, the future of that ancient order stood on a knife's edge. Winterfell bustled with activity. Refugees and travelers from the war-torn south trickled in, seeking safety behind its wards. Sansa organized a relief effort, distributing food and clothing as best she could, even as she struggled to keep her own people fed. There were tears of gratitude from the displaced, and some found work in the fields or stables. The castle halls echoed with many accents: Stormlanders, Riverfolk, even a few from the Westerlands who had fled Lannister taxation. So many were thrust together under one roof that old tensions sometimes flared, but the wards seemed to quell the worst impulses, as though Winterfell itself demanded cooperation. In the quieter corners, Maester Alliser continued his scholarly pursuits. He spent time in the crypts, measuring hidden runes and inscriptions, scribbling notes in a large leather-bound tome. Whenever he came across a passage he couldn't decipher, he sought out Bran's guidance. For all his academic curiosity, Alliser proved discreet about the wards, refusing to speak of them carelessly. One late afternoon, Bran accompanied him down into the crypts, Hodder trailing behind with a torch. The subterranean chill turned each breath to vapor. As they passed the tombs of the old kings in the north, Alliser paused at a sealed alcove. "I've read about the earliest Starks who bound themselves to the children of the forest to create these wards," he murmured, adjusting his spectacles. "But the specifics remain shrouded. Do you know anything from your visions, my lord?" Bran considered. He recalled glimpses from the Weirwood network, archaic ceremonies held under moonlight, the carved faces of the trees illuminated by flickering torches. Blood had been spilled, sigils drawn in the earth. The ancient children of the forest had chanted in a language that felt like wind and rustling leaves. They used primal magic to seal the White Walkers away. The wards functioned as a living link. A Stark in Winterfell, a ring of Weirwoods in the far north, a promise made in blood. Alliser touched the cold stone. "And you reawakened them with Jojen Reed's help. Fascinating. I wonder if it's possible to create new wards elsewhere, forging safe havens across the realm. Or was this bond unique to House Stark?" Bran's heart thudded at the notion, recalling how painful and demanding it had been to empower even one set of wards. "Potentially," he said after a moment, "but it would require a connection to the old god's magic that's strongest in the north, and a willingness to sacrifice blood and self in a way few could endure. In any case, the children of the forest are nearly gone. Without them," Alliser sighed. "Yes, I see. Still, the knowledge should be preserved. For the future." Bran nodded, then turned his chair to continue down the hall. Soon they reached a newer section of crypt, unoccupied except for a single niche containing Jojen Reed's sarcophagus. The stone was unadorned, lacking the sculpted likeness that the ancient Starks had on their tombs. Just a simple plaque with his name. Mira sometimes left small tokens there. A reed stalk, a polished stone from the neck, a few crystals from the children's cavern. Hodder lifted the torch, revealing the sorrowful stillness of that place. Alliser bowed his head. Another name we mustn't forget. Bran did not trust himself to speak. The weight of memory threatened to drown him. Jojen's face returned to him, pale, determined, eyes filled with prophecy. Even now, that memory could tighten Bran's chest. Without Jojen, they would not have succeeded. That truth lingered in every breath of warded air in Winterfell. In the days that followed, Sansa received more urgent messages from Jon and Daenerys. They had nearly reached the Crownlands. Tensions with the Golden Company were escalating. Cersei had barricaded King's Landing, forbidding any talk of surrender. The war loomed, and the lords who had joined Jon were restless for battle, hoping to march quickly on the capital before the city could stockpile more provisions. Some in the north urged Sansa to send reinforcements, significant armies that would bolster Jon's forces. Others cautioned that, with winter still gripping the land, sending a large host could starve the peasants who relied on their harvest stores. Sansa wrestled with the decision, conferring with her advisors daily. She turned to Bran more than once, asking for glimpses of the future, but he could only shrug. "The future is clouded in human choices," he said. "I can see fragments, shapes in the snow, but not everything. This is a matter of men's hearts, not the magic of the others." Eventually, Sansa decided on a careful compromise. A moderate force of northern infantry and cavalry under Lord Glover would move south to Moat Cailin, waiting to see if Jon truly needed them for an assault. If hostilities escalated beyond reason, they could advance. Otherwise, they would remain at the neck, guarding the main approach to Winterfell. Mira, after much deliberation, volunteered to join them. She felt restless in Winterfell. Though she still grieved, the arrival of new refugees and the swirl of daily tasks left her feeling caged. She yearned for action, perhaps a chance to shape the peace Jojen had died for. So she approached Sansa in the Great Hall one morning, offering her spear in service of protecting the North's interests. Sansa studied the Cranagwoman's determined eyes. "Are you certain?" she asked quietly. "You've already given so much to the Starks." Mira's voice was firm. "This is for Jojen, for the realm. If war breaks out, I want to be there to find any path that avoids needless bloodshed. And if there's no avoiding it, then I'll fight to end it quickly." Sansa nodded, not entirely surprised. "Very well. Lord Glover will be glad to have your skill. Keep us informed of any developments at Moat Cailin." On the day of departure, Mira visited Jojen's crypt one last time, laying a hand on the cold stone. "I won't let your vision die," she whispered. "I'll carry it south. We'll find a way." Then she hoisted her spear and joined Lord Glover's column as it wound out of Winterfell's gates. Bran, watching from the ramparts, felt an ache in his chest as she vanished into the swirling snow. He hoped that the seeds of unity sown by Jojen's sacrifice would not be trampled in another war for the throne. Life found a strained equilibrium in the following weeks. The North continued to rebuild, forging new trade routes with the Vale and the Riverlands. Families that had once fought each other now traded timber for grain, aided by the knowledge that the wards in Winterfell provided a bastion of safety. Castle Black, Eastwatch, and Shadow Tower stood half-abandoned, with only skeleton crews of Night's Watchmen. Tormund's free folk roamed the true north, hunting and gathering, returning occasionally to trade pelts. Some watchers said that the realms of men had never known such a swirl of change in so short a time. Then the Raven arrived with dire tidings. King's Landing was under siege. The Golden Company had attacked Daenerys' forces outside the city, leading to a brutal engagement. Jon had survived, but many had died. Daenerys had considered unleashing the dragons on the walls, but dreaded the risk of mass civilian casualties. Even in the chaos of battle, she remembered the horror of what might happen if she turned King's Landing into a field of ash. Cersei had threatened to burn the city from within if the Targaryen queen pressed too hard. It was a standoff that could end in unthinkable destruction. Rumors said that Qyburn, Cersei's twisted advisor, had devised new scorpions more powerful than before, capable of harming even a dragon if shot at close range. At the same time, the starving populace within King's Landing turned desperate. Men muttered that the city might tear itself apart from inside while armies waited outside the gates. Jon's letter to Sansa was clear. If the city fell by force, thousands could die. They needed a way to break Cersei's power without slaughter. Could the wards of Winterfell help? Some northern magic? Or was there a negotiated path? Sansa crumpled the parchment in frustration. "He wants me to solve what's unsolvable," she murmured bitterly to Bran as they stood in her solar. "We have no wards in King's Landing. The old gods hold no power there. And Cersei is cunning enough to use the threat of mass murder to keep the dragons at bay." Bran thought of Jojen's final prophecy. "We have saved them. Now let the living live." But how could they truly live if they clung to hate? He closed his eyes, trying to sense any flicker of guidance from the weirwoods. Yet he felt only the faint hum of Winterfell's wards. The old gods did not meddle lightly in the affairs of men. Sansa's gaze turned to him. "Is there a chance you could reason with her? Show her the illusions of the future, something that might persuade her to yield?" Bran exhaled. "I doubt it. Cersei is not the sort to be swayed by visions. She trusts nothing beyond her own cunning. But let me try something else. I'll see if I can glean any vulnerability in her ranks. Some path for Jon and Daenerys to exploit that spares the city." That evening, Bran made the attempt. He sat beneath the heart tree in Winterfell's godswood, pressing his scarred palm against the trunk. He slipped his consciousness into the ravens scattered around the capital's outskirts, searching for vantage points. The city rose in a maze of cramped streets, tall walls bristling with scorpions. Camps of soldiers huddled around fires outside the battered gates. A large portion of Daenerys' host was arrayed north of the city, while others circled the southern roads. The sky above King's Landing glowed with the red of countless torches. Smoke rose from pyres of the slain. Bran soared on black wings over the ramparts, glimpsing the tension inside. Starving peasants, nervous Lannister guards, corridors of the Red Keep patrolled by the gold cloaks. He saw Qyburn's workshops, brimming with deadly contraptions. And in the highest tower, he sensed Cersei Lannister's presence. A cold aura of desperation wrapped in pride. She paced a lavish chamber, her face contorted with anger. He could not hear her thoughts, only watch her posture, the sharp gestures she made as she spoke to a man in dark armor. Ser Gregor Clegane, the undead abomination. Another figure loomed behind them, tall, with something like a brand across his temple. Bran's raven drew closer to a window. Suddenly, Qyburn turned, as though sensing an intruder, his eyes scanning the darkness. The raven cawed and banked away, retreating into the night. Bran lingered outside the walls, hoping to find signs of how one might breach them without mass slaughter. The scorpions were arrayed along parapets and towers. The slightest flight of a dragon into range would unleash a hail of iron-tipped bolts. The city's inhabitants had taken refuge behind the promise of those deadly machines and the knowledge that Daenerys would not risk burning them all. But then, through another raven perched atop a broken spire, Bran spied a small postern gate near the southwestern corner. It was older, less fortified. A group of peasants and guards argued there, perhaps about letting someone out. The men parted to reveal a robed figure, an emissary, it seemed, carrying a scroll. They slipped through that gate under cover of darkness, heading west, presumably to gather supplies or bring a secret message. It might be a vulnerability, a hidden entrance poorly defended. But a handful of scorpions still stood on that side. Bran withdrew at last, weariness dragging him back into his body. When he opened his eyes, the godswood felt unbearably still. The moonlight bathed the white bark in silver. He shook his head, trying to clear the ache behind his temples. Was that small gate enough? A single weak point might not save the city from a siege. The peace that haunted him was Cersei's face, contorted in a private storm of desperation. If she truly believed she was doomed, she might commit an atrocity out of spite. He relayed his findings to Sansa, who dutifully sent a raven to Jon with the details. There might be a clandestine route into the city if Daenerys' forces needed to strike surgically, capturing Cersei without incinerating thousands. But no one knew if it would be enough. Amid the tension, winter storms battered the roads. The reinforcements under Lord Glover remained at Moat Cailin, awaiting orders. Meera Reed wrote to Sansa, describing the men's growing impatience and the swirl of rumors about King's Landing. She also mentioned that small groups of Lannister deserters had tried to cross the Neck, seeking to join the Targaryen cause. This news puzzled Sansa. Did it mean morale was collapsing inside King's Landing? If so, perhaps negotiations could succeed. Then, after an anxious lull, a raven arrived from Jon, his words rushing across the page with uncharacteristic urgency. An emissary from King's Landing had approached Daenerys's camp under a white flag, offering parley. Cersei proposed a meeting inside the city, guaranteeing safe passage for Daenerys and Jon, but with minimal retinues. She wished to discuss terms that might spare King's Landing from a full assault. Many in Daenerys's war council distrusted it, suspecting a trap, but refusing the parley might doom countless civilians. Jon and Daenerys had agreed to meet in the Dragon Pit, another echo of earlier attempts at negotiation. Word of this pending parley swept the realm. Some saw it as a sign of hope, others as a prelude to treachery. In Winterfell, Sansa paced the walls, worrying that the Dragon Pit might be Cersei's perfect ambush site. She confided in Bran, who tried once more to glean glimpses of the city. Yet the visions were murky. He saw only flickers of the old bones of dragons, the half-ruined dome of the pit, and the hush of a city on edge. Days passed. Then a final message. The parley had taken place, and unbelievably, an agreement was reached. Cersei would surrender King's Landing to Daenerys Targaryen on several conditions: the immediate withdrawal of any force not strictly necessary for maintaining order, the retention of the Lannister name and certain rights to wealth, and safe passage for Cersei to exile if she relinquished her claim to the throne. The Golden Company would stand down, so long as they were paid for their contract's remainder. Rumor said the negotiations were tense, nearly collapsing multiple times. But in the end, no blood was spilled that day. A wave of disbelief and relief washed over Winterfell. If Cersei truly surrendered, then the war might end without a catastrophic final battle. Fewer lives lost. Perhaps Jojen's dream of letting the living live would come to pass. Sansa ordered a feast in the Great Hall, though the stores were meager. The mood was jubilant if guarded. Men drank to Jon and Daenerys, to the memory of those who had died fighting the dead. They drank to House Stark and House Targaryen forging a new future. Several more days crawled by as the aftermath of the surrender played out in King's Landing. Daenerys's letter, when it finally arrived, was read aloud by Sansa in the courtyard. People of the North, the wars are ending. Cersei Lannister has laid down her crown, opening the gates of King's Landing. We have agreed to a bloodless transition, with the Golden Company dismissed and the Lannister armies returning to their lands. Queen Cersei will depart to exile across the narrow sea, stripped of all titles. In exchange, we shall spare the city from fire and ensure no harm befalls its citizens. I, Daenerys Targaryen, intend to proclaim a new era of cooperation among the great houses. I pledge to respect the North's right to self-govern under the Stark family, so long as we remain allies in peace and war. Together, let us rebuild this broken realm. The dragons now stand as protectors, not conquerors. Jon Snow stands beside me, bearing the loyalty of the North in good faith. By the time you read this, the bells of King's Landing will have tolled in acknowledgement of the new order. Let us hope never again to know the terrors we have seen these past years. Signed in faith, Daenerys of the House Targaryen. Applause rippled through the courtyard. Even those who distrusted Targaryens found relief in the idea of peace. Sansa let the scroll curl against her hands, a slow smile bending her lips. "It's done then," she murmured. "No last stand, no sack of the city. We might truly have peace." Bran did not miss the tears glinting in her eyes. A part of him wanted to weep as well, thinking of all that had been lost. If Jojen could see them now, would he smile, or remain wary of the future's hidden twists? Within days, more letters arrived, confirming the basic details. Qyburn had been executed by the Unsullied for crimes against the realm. His horrifying experiments and service to Cersei were judged too monstrous to forgive. Ser Gregor Clegane was destroyed in single combat by Sandor Clegane. who vanished afterward. Jaime Lannister, captured en route to the city, had been allowed to leave with Cersei for exile, though rumors said he'd done so with reluctance. Tyrion Lannister was named Hand of the Queen, a role he accepted with guarded resolve. The Red Keep's gates stood open. Wagons of food and supplies poured in to feed the starving. The city rang with the mixed cheers and protests of a population uncertain of what a Targaryen monarchy might look like, but at least not facing the dragon's wrath. In the weeks that followed, King's Landing began a slow transformation. Jon and Daenerys oversaw the dismantling of the Scorpions, the reformation of the City Watch, the distribution of grain to the poorest districts. The Red Keep remained Daenerys' seat, though talk soon arose of an official coronation. For the North, it signaled an end to immediate war. Sansa, fulfilling her vow, maintained that the North would not become a simple province but rather a close ally. Negotiations through Ravens solidified a treaty. House Stark would govern the North as wardens, answering directly to the Targaryen crown only in times of realm-wide crisis. In turn, Daenerys pledged not to impose southern taxes on northern markets, nor to interfere with the worship of the old gods. It was a compromise that satisfied most. Not long after, a raven from Jon Snow landed in Winterfell's rookery. It bore a personal note for Bran. Hodder delivered it to him in the Solar, where Bran read the small parchment by lamplight. "Bran, I pray this letter finds you well. The city is calmer now, though not yet at peace. We've had to quell riots in Flea Bottom and put down a few rebellious sellswords left behind by the Golden Company. But each day is better than the last. Daenerys has proven merciful, though firm, and the people gradually accept her rule. I write to ask if you would journey south. Daenerys and I wish for your presence at the coronation ceremony, which is being planned for the end of the moon's turn. Sansa might remain in the north if she wishes, but we'd have you by our side, for you are my brother, whatever else is said, and you are the keeper of the old god's knowledge. The realm should see that the new age honors both old and new. If it pleases you, come with a small escort. We have begun repairing the roads. As a final gift, we hope to open a weirwood garden in the city, that those who worship the old gods might find a piece of the north in the capital. If you choose to bless it, I'd be grateful. Your brother always, Jon." Bran lowered the note, heart pounding. A piece of the north in King's Landing. A garden for the old gods. Perhaps it was symbolic, but a symbol that might unite a realm still raw from war. He mulled over the invitation that evening with Sansa, who was torn. She wanted to ensure the North's representation at the coronation but feared leaving Winterfell unguarded. In the end, she agreed that they could spare a small entourage if she remained behind to govern. So it was decided. A fortnight later, Bran Stark left Winterfell for the first time since the war's end, traveling with a small retinue of guards, Maester Alistair and Hodder. The wards did not falter in his absence. Sansa's presence kept them stable, plus the link with the far northern circle did not require Bran's constant attention anymore. The roads were still rough, but the group moved steadily south, greeting villagers who had heard rumor of peace and were eager to trade. Crossing the Neck felt strange without Mira or Jojen. Bran remembered traveling this way before, in secrecy and fear, hounded by the threat of the dead. Now the path was clear, if muddy, and travelers often shared news or an open fire by night. At Moat Cailin, he found that Lord Glover's men had begun packing to return home, their swords no longer needed. Mira was there as well, looking worn from the road and from worry, but visibly relieved to learn that King's Landing had surrendered with minimal bloodshed. When she heard that Bran was headed south to the coronation, she hesitated only a moment before asking, "Will you have me along?" Bran regarded her with a slow smile. "I'd be honored. Jojen would want you to see what comes of all this." So Mira joined Bran's retinue. They continued on, passing the spot where the Trident's waters gleamed under weak sunlight. On the banks, a few encampments remained from the final campaigns. Soldiers dismantled fortifications, stowing arms in wagons. Some wore the three-headed dragon, others the direwolf of Stark, a few with the blackfish of House Tully. All seemed eager to return home now that the war had ended. As Bran's party traveled among them, Men offered salutes and polite curiosity. Everyone knew of the young Stark who had reawakened old magic, who had soared with ravens. They asked about the wards, the circle of weirwoods, the final stand against the Night King. Bran answered with gentle, measured words, mindful of how rumors could twist truth. Mira remained quiet, occasionally offering corrections if some soldier twisted Jojen's role into mere rumor. She made sure people knew. Jojen Reed was a hero who died that they might live. At Harrenhal, they found the ruin partially reclaimed by house whence distant cousins, who sought to gather the scattered fortunes of that once mighty fortress. The blackened towers still loomed like a cautionary tale of Targaryen fire, but Daenerys's arrival in the realm seemed less dreadful than Aegon's conquest centuries past. She had not turned King's Landing into another Harrenhal. The realm whispered that this Targaryen queen might be different, forging peace instead of desolation. Finally, the battered roads turned into the King's Road proper, leading them through the Crownlands. Here, fields lay scorched in places, the aftermath of small skirmishes. But as they neared King's Landing, signs of recovery appeared. Merchants traveled the roads with wagons of produce, stonemasons labored on broken walls, and the city itself emerged on the horizon. A sprawling mass of brick and timber, the Red Keep perched on its rocky prominence. The blackened scars from the battles with the Golden Company were being repaired, new stones fitted where old ones had crumbled. Bran's retinue paused briefly at the outskirts, gazing at the walls. Mira's eyes narrowed. She had never seen King's Landing, and the vastness astonished her. Hard to believe so many people cram into one place, she murmured half to herself. Hodder shifted restlessly, repeating his name in a low voice. Perhaps the bustle and unfamiliar stench of so many thousands made him uneasy. Bran placed a comforting hand on the man's arm. "It's all right, Hodder. We won't stay long if it makes you uncomfortable." At the gates, the city watch, now wearing tabards with a dragon and wolf combined insignia, waved them through after recognizing the Stark banner. Curious crowds parted to let them pass. Street urchins ran alongside the procession, craning to catch glimpses of the boy in the wheeled chair. Whispers floated on the air. "That's Bran Stark, the Stark Greenseer? He sees crows. He's the one who helped kill the White Walkers." The Red Keep's outer courtyard welcomed them with a flurry of activity. Unsullied soldiers stood in disciplined ranks. Half a dozen Northmen rushed forward to greet Bran, offering to help with luggage or stable the horses. Tyrion Lannister appeared, dressed in finery that seemed at odds with his usual unkempt style. He bowed low. "Lord Bran, welcome. Queen Daenerys awaits you and your companions." Mira regarded Tyrion with reserved interest. She had heard the stories about the imp, once forced into exile, now Hand of the Queen. Tyrion offered her a polite bow as well. "I've heard of your valor, Lady Reed. You have my sympathies for your loss." Mira nodded in silent acknowledgement. They were led through the corridors of the Red Keep, some newly refurbished, others still bearing scars of the short siege. Banners displaying the Targaryen dragon and the Stark direwolf hung side by side in the Great Hall. The throne of swords towered at the far end, though no one sat upon it just now. Courtiers mingled, many wearing old house sigils or newly stitched combinations to show loyalty. At last, they arrived at a private solar where Daenerys and Jon waited. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating them both. Daenerys wore a dark red gown trimmed with silver, her hair braided in an elegant style. Jon stood beside her, clad in furs that seemed out of place in the southern climate. The sight of him made Bran's heart lurch. Jon looked tired, older than his years, yet a spark of relief lit his eyes when he saw Bran. "Bran," Jon said warmly, stepping forward. He crouched to clasp his brother's hand, even as Bran remained seated. "You came. Thank you." Daenerys smiled, though there was a note of gravity in it. "Welcome to King's Landing, Lord Stark. We're grateful you could be here for the coronation." Her gaze flicked to Mira. "And Lady Reed, your courage precedes you. Jon has spoken of how your brother gave his life for all of us." Mira inclined her head. "I'm here for him and for the North." Daenerys accepted that with quiet respect. Then she looked back to Bran. "If you're not too tired from your journey, there's something we'd like to show you." They led Bran and Mira through a winding path of corridors and out into a large courtyard perched against the Red Keep's southern wall. Typically, this space had been used for storage or minor training exercises, but now workers were tilling soil, hauling in wooden planters, and installing a tall, young weirwood sapling in the center. Its pale bark glimmered in the midday light, though it was only half the height of a full-grown tree. Bran felt a stirring in his chest at the sight of that sapling. Weirwoods rarely grew beyond the north, let alone within city walls. But here it stood, a precious scion transplanted from who knew what secret grove. White leaves, tinted faintly with pink at the edges, ruffled in the breeze. Its roots extended carefully into a large bed of dark earth, supported by wooden stakes. Jon exhaled, glancing between Bran and the sapling. "We brought it down from the neck, with help from some crannogmen. Sam believed it might take root in the southern climate if carefully nourished. We've set wards around it to protect against disease. It's not much yet, but we hope one day it'll stand as a reminder that the old gods have a place in the new realm." Bran approached, Hodder pushing his chair forward. The faint smell of fresh-turned soil and newly watered roots touched his senses. He carefully extended a hand to brush against the young trunk. A tingle ran up his arm, subtle but unmistakable. The presence of the weirwood, even so small, connected to the vast tapestry of its kin. "It's alive," Bran murmured, voice trembling. "I can feel it." Daenerys stepped closer. "We want to open this courtyard to all who wish to pray to the old gods, or simply reflect. A piece of the north in King's Landing, like Jon wrote to you." Her expression softened. "It might help unify hearts, to see that we respect what was nearly lost." Mira's eyes misted. Jojen would have loved this. A weirwood here in the south. He always believed the old gods belonged to everyone, if they only listened. Bran bent his head, closing his eyes in silent communion with the sapling. Through it, he sensed the thousands of souls dwelling in the city. Anxious, weary, but yearning for stability. He felt the echoes of wars past, the residue of dragons that once soared overhead. But most of all, he felt a gentle stirring of hope, as if the realm itself was breathing again after a long suffocation. In that moment, he silently thanked Jojen. Because he had lived beyond the prophecy, everything had changed. The wards had held, the Night King was destroyed, and now men and women stood on the threshold of a new age. There would be challenges, human ambition would never vanish, and the realm would need constant tending, like the sapling. But it was alive, poised to grow into something strong and beautiful, if nurtured well. Jon placed a hand on Bran's shoulder. "There's more to do," he said quietly, "but we wanted you here to bless it in a sense, even if only by your presence." Bran nodded, emotion raw in his chest. He let his hand rest gently on the bark, sending a silent prayer through the weirwood network, a vow to protect what they had won. Daenerys watched with quiet respect, her silver-white hair catching the sunlight. Mira stood at Bran's side, spear in hand, a symbol of House Reed's bravery. Hodder hovered behind, eyes wide with wonder at this new place so different from the frozen north. And there, in the courtyard of the Red Keep, a single leaf fluttered down from the weirwood sapling. Bran caught it in his hand before it touched the ground, feeling its delicate veins. Perhaps it was just a leaf, or perhaps it was a sign of new beginnings, of a realm forging a peace that might endure longer than any had dared to hope. When the coronation took place days later, the Red Keep blazed with ceremony. Nobles from across the 7 kingdoms, now rethinking whether 7 was even the right term with the North's partial autonomy, gathered in the throne room. Daenerys, adorned in regal attire befitting her lineage, stood before the Iron Throne. Jon, at her side, wore simpler finery, as if rejecting the pomp. A high septon, newly raised by popular acclaim after the chaos in King's Landing, offered blessings in the faith of the 7. Then, in an unprecedented gesture, Bran Stark was asked to speak for the old gods, naming Daenerys Targaryen protector of the realm in the eyes of the ancient powers. Bran did so with measure, reverence, feeling the eyes of thousands on him. He uttered the words he felt rise in his heart. We, who remember the wind among the weirwoods, pledge that the old gods watch this day, as we pledge ourselves to unity and life, that we may never again face the shadows alone. A hush fell. Daenerys knelt, and the High Septon placed a crown of forged Valyrian steel, inlaid with rubies and onyx, upon her head. She stood, queen of the realm, under the watch of 7 gods and the old. Applause thundered, though many still harbored doubts or grudges. Peace was fragile, but here, in this moment, it felt possible. When it was done, Daenerys turned, took Jon's hand, and raised it with hers, proclaiming him king consort. The lords cheered, some with genuine fervor, others with strained courtesy. Jon's face reddened, but he bowed his head, embracing the role he had never desired but accepted for the greater good. Then Daenerys's gaze swept the hall. By the authority vested in me, I name Sansa Stark Warden of the North, that house and region free to govern itself, with the bond of alliance to this crown. May all see that we stand as equals in mutual respect. Bran felt tears in his eyes again, thinking of how far they'd come. The hall erupted in applause anew. He caught sight of Tyrion, arms folded, lips quirked in satisfaction. Samwell Tarly, beaming like a proud parent. Gendry, the blacksmith turned lord, offering a cheer. Mira stood to one side, her posture guarded but a small smile on her lips. In the wake of these ceremonies, feasts ensued. Wine flowed freely, minstrels sang of dragons and direwolves. At times, Bran slipped from the crowds to find quiet corners, reflection more comforting than revelry. He found a balcony overlooking the city, the scent of salt on the breeze. Mira joined him there, standing silently for a while. She spoke at last. I wonder what Jojen would say to all this pomp. Bran chuckled softly. He'd probably find it terribly loud and indulgent. But maybe he'd be glad that no one's bleeding. She nodded, looking out over King's Landing sprawl, the rooftops and winding streets. Lanterns glowed like fireflies in the dark. I still miss him, she said, voice hushed. I always will, but at least I can tell myself it wasn't in vain. Bran reached for her hand and squeezed gently. It wasn't. Below them, the city's bells tolled in celebration, echoing against the star-strewn sky. Once, those bells had rung doom as wildfire threatened to engulf King's Landing. Now they rang with hope, or at least the promise that tomorrow might be kinder. The next day, Daenerys held a smaller gathering in the courtyard with the weirwood sapling. She invited Bran, Jon, Tyrion, and a select few. The courtyard had been tidied for the occasion, planters arranged with new greenery, as if symbolizing a realm's renewal. Daenerys brushed her fingers over the pale bark, then turned to Bran with a thoughtful expression. I'd like to carve a face, she said. A new face for this weirwood, if that's permissible. The children of the forest once carved them, didn't they? And the first men, too, in their time. Bran's eyes widened. It's our tradition that the faces be carved only when the old gods are invoked. It's a sacred act. Are you certain? Daenerys glanced at Jon, then back to Bran. If we truly mean to unite old and new, let's do it properly. Let this sapling bear witness to our vow that the realm will not turn on itself. If you're willing to guide my hand, I'd be honored. It was unprecedented. A Targaryen queen seeking to carve a weirwood. Yet the times themselves were unprecedented. Bran agreed, albeit nervously. He produced a small carving knife of dragonglass that he carried for symbolic purposes. Tyrion watched with fascination, while Jon maintained a respectful distance, ready to intervene if anything went awry. Bran positioned Daenerys's hands on the bark, showing her the technique. She pressed the blade gently against the surface, flaking away the white bark. A faint resinous scent rose. Each cut had to be deliberate and reverent. Bran coached her through shaping 2 almond-like eyes. Tiny trickles of red sap oozed forth, as though the tree wept softly. Daenerys paused, unsettled. I don't want to harm it. It's a shared life now, Bran murmured, guiding her. The old gods see through these eyes. They share our joys and sorrows. Keep going gently, she resumed, carving a calm, sorrowful mouth, small lines around the eyes, a brow that seemed pensive rather than wrathful. By the time she finished, the face was incomplete, more a suggestion of features than a finished carving, but it held a simple dignity that matched the tree's youth. Red sap bled from the edges, forming tears on the white bark. Daenerys stepped back, exhaling a shaky breath. Jon approached, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You've done it. Now the old gods have a new face in King's Landing. Bran sensed a ripple of energy moving through the courtyard, a subtle acknowledgement from the Weirwood network. He closed his eyes and let it flow through him, welcoming this new connection. The wards themselves remained anchored in the north, but this small presence in the capital served as a symbol of unity. He felt no rejection, no wrath from the old gods. Rather, a curious acceptance, as though they recognized a new caretaker. In the days that followed, news spread of the Dragon Queen, carving a face into a weirwood sapling. Some scoffed, calling it a hollow gesture. Others, particularly those from the north or devout to the old gods, were astonished and touched. The story took on a life of its own, fueling rumor and speculation that Daenerys truly wished to break the old cycles of conquest and rebellion. Bran spent time near that sapling each day, sometimes alone, sometimes joined by Mira or Jon. Hodder, unsettled by the city's crowds, found solace there, dozing under the branches while gentle breezes carried the scent of the narrow sea. Daenerys herself came occasionally, placing a hand on the trunk as though to remind herself of the vow she had made. As the realm began to settle into this new order, the endless meetings and tasks of governance filled Daenerys' schedule. Reorganizing the crown's finances, forging alliances with houses that once served the Lannisters, deciding how to handle the freed men from Essos who had accompanied her. Jon assisted, though he yearned to return north eventually. Winterfell will always be my home, he confided to Bran one evening in private. But for now, the realm needs us here. Tyrion found himself swamped with administrative duties as hand, wrestling with everything from trade tariffs to the demands of southern lords who tested the new queen's patience. Davos Seaworth, serving as an advisor, lent his practical sense of fairness, though he often lamented that he had little skill with matters of coin. Gendry, recognized now as Lord Baratheon of Storm's End by Daenerys' decree, focused on restoring the Stormlands to some semblance of prosperity. Amid these political complexities, the streets of King's Landing slowly stabilized. The black and red banners of House Targaryen hung from the walls, joined in some districts by the direwolf of Stark. Food shipments arrived from the Riverlands and the Reach, supporting the city's population as they recovered from famine. The small folk looked upon Daenerys with a mixture of gratitude and lingering wariness. Memories of her father's madness and the recent chaos did not vanish overnight. But each day without violence dulled old fears, and the presence of the North's representatives seemed to reassure many that this was no mere tyranny disguised as mercy. One afternoon, a tearful woman approached Bran and Mira while they were in the courtyard. She carried a young child in her arms and bowed low. "My lord, my lady, they say you fought the dead themselves, that you come from the far north where the old gods dwell. My baby has been sickly since the fighting. We cannot afford the city's healers. Please, can you help?" Mira glanced at Bran uncertainly. They were not maesters, nor did they have any healing magic. But Bran waved the woman over, taking a moment to look at the child's pallid face. He asked a few questions about the child's symptoms, recalling some of the healing knowledge the children of the forest had shared with him in passing. Herbs that could reduce fever, certain salves for infections. Maester Alistair soon joined them, examining the child. He recommended a mixture of ground seeds and a mild poultice, promising to arrange for some from the royal stores if Daenerys approved. The mother wept in relief. "Thank you, oh thank you. We've lost so much already. Please, I beg the old gods to spare my child." Bran felt a pang of helplessness, wishing he could do more. "The old gods hear you," he said softly, though he wasn't entirely sure how much they intervened in single human lives. "We'll do what we can. No promises beyond that." Still, seeing such pleas reminded him how fragile peace could be. The realm needed food, medicine, jobs, things far less dramatic than wards and dragonfire, yet just as vital to preserving what they'd fought for. Days blurred into a rhythm of delicate negotiations, reconstruction, and slow healing. Bran found a measure of calm in the presence of the weirwood sapling, though it would take decades for it to become a towering tree. Each time he touched it, he sensed faint glimmers of the greater network, reminding him that Winterfell stood safe under Sansa's care, that the far north circle slumbered now that the White Walkers were gone. He sensed ghostly echoes of Jojen Reed, the green seer who had outlasted his prophecy so he could guide them all. Eventually, the time came for Bran and Meera to consider returning north. The realm's future looked steadier. Daenerys had cemented alliances, King's Landing no longer teetered on starvation, and the Queen's reign was recognized by most great houses. Even the Westerlands, lacking strong leadership after the Lannisters' downfall, slowly bent the knee. Jon, though reluctant to remain, agreed to stay in the capital a while longer to help ensure the transition was peaceful. On the final morning of their stay, Bran wheeled himself out to the courtyard, Hodder trailing behind with their packed belongings. Meera supervised the loading of the wagon. The small retinue that had accompanied them from Winterfell was ready to depart, eager to be back in the north. Daenerys and Jon arrived to bid farewell. Daenerys placed a hand on Bran's shoulder. "Thank you for coming, Lord Stark. Your presence made all the difference at the coronation, and your counsel has been invaluable." Bran inclined his head. "I'm grateful for the chance to see peace, Your Grace. Remember the wards. Remember that men's hearts can turn dark if left untended. You must keep guiding them." Her gaze flickered. "I will. Sometimes I wonder if the real war begins now, the war to keep the living united. But we'll do our best." She glanced at Hodder and Meera, offering them each a nod. "You have my thanks, both of you." Jon clasped arms with Meera. "I hope to visit Winterfell soon. I miss it. Sometimes it feels as though I only swapped one kind of cold for another." Meera managed a small grin. "We'll keep a fire lit for you. Or maybe we'll just keep you out in the yard to freeze." Jon actually laughed, a genuine sound that warmed the air. Then he turned to Bran, face turning solemn. "Safe travels, brother. The North is in good hands with Sansa, but I know it'll feel more complete with you there." Bran nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "Take care, Jon. If you need anything, if another threat arises, send a raven to Winterfell. The old gods watch all corners of the realm." With that, they parted. The gates of the Red Keep swung open, and Bran's retinue moved out through the streets. Crowds parted, some offering curious stares, others nodding respectfully. The new Targaryen banners flapped overhead. The city smelled of salt, fish, and 1,000 other scents. Yet beneath it all, Bran felt the stirring of new possibility. The weirwood sapling was planted, the war ended, a treaty forged. Their journey north was easier than the southward trek. Summer might still be a distant dream, but the roads were safer. Soldiers no longer lurked in every hollow. Farmers resumed their labors. The people they passed seemed cautiously optimistic, though occasional scuffles and robberies reminded them that not all ills vanish with a treaty. Still, as they crossed the Trident and continued onward, Meera commented on how the realm felt alive again, no longer braced for the apocalypse of the dead. At Moat Cailin, the garrison greeted them cheerfully. Most men had left for home, leaving only a skeleton watch to maintain the fortress. Further on, the swamps of the Neck rose around them, teeming with frogs and waterfowl. Meera sometimes gazed at the marshes with a mournful smile, recalling days passed with Jojen. Then they pressed north, forging through the last snowy stretches until Winterfell's familiar walls appeared on the horizon. The wards greeted Bran like a long-lost friend. He felt the castle resonate with warmth, a subtle hum that made the stone feel alive beneath his hands. Servants rushed to help them dismount and unload. Word spread fast. Lord Bran was returned. Hodder smiled in relief, stepping onto the courtyard cobblestones with a happy mutter of "Hodder home." Sansa came to greet them personally, wearing a cloak of wolf pelts that contrasted her red hair. She embraced Bran in a gentle hug. "You're back, thank the gods. How is the capital?" Bran let out a breath. "As well as one could hope. The queen is crowned, the throne is stable for now, and the city recovers." Sansa led them into the great hall, gesturing for hot mulled wine to be brought. She sat with them at the high table, listening closely as Bran recounted the story of the weirwood sapling, the carved face, and the forging of a new peace. Sansa's eyes shone with relief and pride, especially when Mira mentioned how the capital felt less fearful than she'd expected. Mira added, "I think the realm might actually have a chance now." Sansa lifted her goblet. "To that chance, may it last." They drank, feeling the hush of the hall, the crackle of the hearth. Outside, men patrolled Winterfell's walls, guardians of the wards. Yet no existential threat loomed on the horizon. For the first time in an age, the North stood not in defiance or siege, but in cautious fellowship with the rest of Westeros. When the meal ended, Bran asked Sansa if he might visit the crypt. She understood without question. Mira joined him, carrying a small torch to light the way. Together, they descended into the cool dark beneath the castle, passing the ancient statues of kings in the north. The wards pulsed softly in the stone, a faint hum beneath the hush of centuries. They came to Jojen's resting place. Mira brushed a hand over the plaque bearing his name. No dust had collected, Sansa must have seen to that. Bran's eyes adjusted to the dim glow. His throat tightened, remembering all that had happened since Jojen's final breath. He laid a hand on the stone, feeling a mild warmth from the wards. Quietly, he murmured, "We did it. We ended the Night King and prevented more war than we could avoid. Cersei's gone. Daenerys is queen. The North is free. The living have a future." Mira closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. If only he could be here to see it. Bran nodded, voice trembling. "But in a way he is. Every day we breathe in a world that survived. Jojen Reed made this possible." Together, they stood in silence, listening to the faint drip of water through the crypt, the gentle brush of air along the passage. The wards throbbed like a distant heartbeat, echoing the memory of a boy who guided destiny. Outside, the north's winds rustled the remaining leaves in the godswood, where the carved face of the weirwood gazed on, unblinking. Far to the south, another young weirwood grew in a courtyard of the Red Keep, bearing tears of red sap, a promise that some bonds spanned the entire realm. In time, they would face other trials. Ambition, greed, new feuds. Human failings never vanished. But for now, the realm rested after an age of horror. A fragile peace endured. The dead walked no more. The wards stood unbroken, and a quiet hope took root in the hearts of those who remembered how close they had come to eternal night. Bran Stark would forever carry the memory of Jojen's determined eyes and the slash of dragonglass that saved the realm. Mira Reed bore the scar of loss, yet also the pride of what they had achieved. Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen strove to be wise rulers, guided by the lessons of the long night. The North breathed freely, no longer bound by a crown that cared little for its snows. Together, they reached for a tomorrow shaped not by fate's cruelty, but by the living's resolve to endure and protect each other. And somewhere in the wind that swept through Winterfell's towers, in the rustle of the weirwood leaves and the hush of crypts below, Jojen Reed's spirit lingered, a whisper of gratitude, a quiet farewell, content in the knowledge that he had seen the realm through its darkest hour, ensuring that dawn would come for them all.